Hello. How's it going, everyone? Hello, hello. Good to see you all. Good to see you all. Hmm, How are we doing today? We doing good? It is super sunny here today, so it makes up for the fact that it's not super warm. That's what I've decided anyway. If you're gonna at least be cold, please be sunny. It's still the time of year where I'm in denial when it's cold outside, and it's like, I don't need a coat. I don't need a jacket. I'm just gonna go out the way I am. And it's upsetting. And then I'm upset because I'm cold. But just so in denial, like opening windows far too early when they should not be open. And yeah, it's just how it is. I'm just ready for it to be a little bit warmer, like 60s, 70s. Beautiful and sunny. Beautiful. Is that too much to ask? Is it? Apparently. Oh well. That's what happens when it's May. When it's May in Chicago. But yes. Let's see. Reading updates. I did go to the library today and I picked up the next volume of Akira. What's worth? Thank you so much for the resub. 10 months. Oh my God. Oh my gosh. Wild. And I'm a little sad. I Today was the first day that I took off the text to speech. Had I known that you were going to write in Spanish, I would have loved to hear how it would have said it. But I can't, yeah, I know. I can't believe that it has also been 10 months. Wild, wild. Thank you so, so much. Glad that you're here. Also, what a way to come into chat. Amazing, amazing. Not mediocre, not mediocre. And I'm sure it would have. I'm sure it has a hard time just saying Moog. So I'm 1000% sure it would have no idea how to say any of those words. So it's fine. It's fine. Um, but yeah, I went to the library today and I picked up the second volume of Akira, and there's only six, and it is different from other manga in that it is read like a Western book, like from left, left, right to left. Oh my gosh, I was like, how do I like you flip the book this way instead of this way? If that makes sense. There we go. Um, and yeah, we'll see. We'll see. It's very weird. I watched the movie and the movie was extremely weird and I had no idea what was happening. And that was a couple years ago. And it's like, all right, well, this is like the basis for a lot of different things. So I think I'm going to try it again. So now I'm reading through it and then we'll watch the movie to see if I can like pick things up better. We'll see. We'll see. It's very weird. I can definitely see like Stranger Things vibe in at least the first volume, and I'm always happy when that happens. Influence. There we go. Stranger Things influence. Words sometimes are really hard. It's what happens when I don't have a script in front of me and have to come up with my own words. A struggle. And I am so, so close to finishing Yerba Buena. I have 32 pages left. I will probably finish on maybe tonight. Maybe tonight. Maybe after stream I'll read it. I'll read it. My little what's it? Bedtime story. But yeah, I only have 32 pages in there. I am enjoying it so far. It is very I heard somebody describe another book and I feel like it's very much the same vibe. It is like you're a fly on the wall and you're just watching things happen rather than being emotionally invested and like entrenched in all of the thoughts, feelings, all of those types of things with the characters. And I usually say like it feels like there's like a veil in front, but I feel like the fly on the wall, like I feel like it fits. And I think that some of the things that are happening to both of our main characters are very tragic, extremely tragic, but I'm not feeling super close or invested in their feelings, if that makes sense. So we'll see. We'll see. Golden, hello, good to see you again. Hi. And I think that's all I'm reading. I'm hoping that a book comes in for Friday's reading sprints. If not, it's not like I don't have books here that I can read. So I'm not too worried that I won't have something to read, but we'll see. We'll see. It's all up in the air. Everything is loosey-goosey and flowing over here. This is what happens when you try to have a plan. Things don't always work, but you know. Duddy, hello. How's it going? Good to see you. But today, oops, just working, just working. Yeah. Today we are part two, chapter 7 in Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes, and this is the translation by Edith Grossman. So the picture here is the same edition that I have. Tinkerhell, hello, good to see you. Oof, crossing my legs. I don't know why I don't just start with my legs crossed, because I usually immediately need to cross them, but here we are. So this is how far we are. We're doing so good. So good. Okay, let's see. What happened last time? I don't remember, question mark. Let's see if I can like look back real quick. They are back in their village. Sancho, oh, that's right. Okay. Sancho and Don Quixote are back in their village, and they are like the town and like the people who are related to them are trying to keep them there so that Don Quixote doesn't go further into his delusion and hurt himself and or other people. And we get a weird peek into Sancho's life too. He goes back home, chats with his wife, but his vocabulary and the way he's talking is very much like so much higher brow than how he usually speaks. So there is notes embedded in the chapter that's like, this isn't really how, you know, the editor feels that he would talk or something like that. Um, and the wife is pretty much like, I am not gonna help you do whatever it is you're doing, and I'm not gonna let you marry off our daughter to some highfalutin person. Basically, basically. Oh my gosh, Tinkerhell, no, you need sleep. Doing your best. That's all. That's all we can do, right? Well, hopefully this will like help you lull to sleep. Maybe if you're at a good time when you can sleep, hopefully this will help. Um yeah, so that's basically it. They are back in their village and people are trying to convince them to stay except for like Sancho's wife Teresa who's like, "Please go do your thing and leave me out of it." Basically. Basically. At least we'll get an interesting, if nonsensical chat message. That's true. That's true. That'll be exciting. All right, so let's go ahead and get back to it. Chapter 7. Regarding the conversation that Don Quixote had with his squire, as well as other exceptionally famous events. Oh, I remembered something else that happened in this chapter because we started part 2. Um, Miguel Cervantes does a really cool thing with embedding the criticisms that part 1 had and sort of plot holes, or not plot holes, but like details that were missing, like about Sancho's donkey and about like did they pick up the money that they ransacked and what they did with it and all those sorts of things. And they did it by having a scholar there who was talking about how he read their journeys so far and asking them questions about it. And then Don Quixote and Sancho are able to be like, well, this is what actually happened, and sort of like fill in those gaps. So that's kind of cool. Um, it was interesting. It was pretty meta. Let's see. So yeah, I think that might be where we left off. Let's try this again. Chapter 7. Regarding the conversation that Don Quixote had with his squire, as well as other exceptionally famous events. When the housekeeper saw that Sancho Panza had shut himself away with his master, she knew that their business was, and imagining that this consultation would result in a determination to embark on a third sally, she put on her cloak and, filled with sorrow and grief, went to find bachelor Sanson Carrasco, for it seemed to her that because he was well-spoken and a recent friend, he could persuade her master to abandon his mad intentions. Sanson Carrasco is the scholar. She found him walking in the courtyard of his house, and when she saw him, she fell at his feet, perspiring in her distress. When Carrasco saw the display of sorrow and alarm, he said to her, "What is it, Señora? What has happened? You look as if your heart would break." "Oh, it's nothing, Señor Sanson, except that my master's pushing out, and he's pushing out, no doubt about it." "And where is he pushing out, Señora?" asked Sanson. "For has he broken any part of his body?" "He isn't pushing out anywhere," she responded, "except through the door of his madness. I mean, dear Señor Bachelor, that he wants to leave again, and this will be the third time, to search the wide world for what he calls ventures, and I don't understand how he can give them that name." And there's a note after that name, and it says, the housekeeper's statement is based on her confusing aventura, which is adventure, with ventura, which is happiness, luck, and fortune, are the relevant meanings for that. I've translated ventura as venture in order to establish the connection with adventure, though a better word would probably be fortune. The first time they brought him back to us, lying across a donkey, beaten and battered. The second time he came home in an ox cart, locked in a cage and claiming he was enchanted, and the poor man was in such a state that his own mother wouldn't have recognized him, skinny, pale, his eyes sunk right into the top of his head. To bring him back to himself a little, I used more than 600 eggs. God knows that. And so does everybody else, and my hens, too, and they wouldn't let me lie. I certainly can believe that, responded the bachelor, for they are so good, so plump, and so well-bred, that they would not tell a falsehood, even if it killed them. In fact, Señora, is there someone else, some mishap other than the one you fear Señor Don Quixote plans to undertake? No, señor, she responded. Well then, don't worry, responded the bachelor, but go home in peace and prepare a hot lunch for me, and on the way say Apollonia's, there we go, we would get there eventually. Say Saint Apollonia's prayer, if you know it. I'll be there soon, and then you'll see wonders. There's a note after Saint Apollonia's prayer, and it says, this was a prayer to cure toothache. I'm loving these little notes at the end, just like thrown in because I didn't know that. And it just adds so much humor and context to things that otherwise would just be passed by. So that's really cool. Lord save us, replied the housekeeper. Did your grace say I should say Saint Apollonia's prayer? That would work if my master's trouble was in his teeth, but is in his brain. I know what I'm saying, Señora. Go now, and don't start arguing with me. You know I'm a bachelor from Salamanca, and there's no better babbler than that, responded Carrasco. There's a note after babbler than that, and it says a secondary meaning for bachiller, the holder of a bachelor's degree, is a person who babbles or chatters. Cervantes plays with the two meanings of the word. And at this the housekeeper left, and the bachelor went immediately to find the priest, in order to communicate to him what will be related in due course. When Don Quixote and Sancho were shut away together, they had a conversation that is recounted in the history with a good deal of accuracy and attention to detail. Sancho said to his master, Señor, I've already conveyed to my wife to let me go with your grace wherever you want to take me. Convinced is what you mean, Sancho, said Don Quixote, not conveyanced. Oh my gosh, I did it again. Every time Sancho says like a wrong word, I just read the right word. Oops. I just have to slow down. Apologies for that. Once or twice, responded Sancho, if I remember correctly. I've asked your grace not to correct my words, if you understand what I mean by them. And when you don't understand, say, Sancho, you devil, I don't understand you. And if I can't explain, then you can correct me. I'm so plain. I do not understand you, Sancho, said Don Quixote, because I do not know what I am so plaint means. So plaint means, responded Sancho, that's just the way I am. Now I understand you even less, replied Don Quixote. Well, if you can't understand me, responded Sancho, I don't know any other way to say it. That's all I know, and may God protect me. Oh, now I have it, responded Don Quixote. You meant to say that you are so pliant, so docile and soft-hearted, that you will accept what I tell you and learn what I teach you. I'll bet, said Sancho, you knew what I was saying and understood me from the beginning, but wanted to mix me up so you could hear me make another 200 mistakes. That may be, replied Don Quixote. Tell me, then, what does Teresa say? Teresa says, said Sancho, that I should keep a sharp eye on you, and there's no arguing against written proof, because if you cut the deck, you don't deal, and a bird in hand is worth two in the bush. And I say that a woman's advice is no jewel, and the man who doesn't take it is a fool. And I say that as well, responded Don Quixote. Continue, Sancho, my friend, go on, for today you are speaking perils. You are speaking pearls. The fact is, responded Sancho, that as your grace knows very well, we're all subject to death, here today and gone tomorrow, and the lamb goes as quickly as the sheep, and nobody can promise himself more hours of life in this world than the ones God wants to give him, because death is silent, and when she comes knocking at the door of our life, she's always in a hurry, and nothing will stop her, not prayers or struggles or scepters or mitres, and that's something that everybody hears, something they tell us from the pulpit. All of that is true, said Don Quixote, but I do not know where it is taking you. It's taking me to this, said Sancho. Your grace should tell me exactly what salary you'll give me for each month I serve you, and this salary should be paid to me from your estate. I don't want to depend on anybody's favors, which come late or badly or never. May God help me to tend to my own business. The point is, I want to know what I'm earning, whether it's a lot or a little. A hen sits on her egg, and a lot of littles make a lot. And as long as you're earning, you don't lose a thing. And if it should happen, and I don't believe or expect that it will, that your grace gives me the insula you promised, I'm not such an ingrate, and not such a penny pincher, that I won't want the rent from the insula to be added up and deducted from my salary, pro rata. Sancho, my friend, responded Don Quixote, sometimes a rat is as good as a rata. I understand, said Sancho. I'll bet I should have said rata and not rat, but it doesn't matter at all, because your grace understood me. And I understood you well, responded Don Quixote, that I have penetrated to your most hidden thoughts, and I know the target you are trying to hit with the countless arrows of your proverbs. Look, Sancho, I certainly should have specified a salary for you if I had found in any of the histories of the knights-errant an example that would have revealed to me and shown me, by means of the smallest sign, what wages were for a month or a year. But I have read all or most of their histories, and I do not recall reading that any knight-errant ever specified a fixed salary for his squire. I know only that all of them served without pay, and when they least expected it, if things had gone well for their masters, they found themselves rewarded with an insula, or something comparable, or at the very least, they received a title and nobility. If, with these expectations and addenda, you, Sancho, would like to serve me again, then welcome. But if you think I am going to force the ancient usage of knight-errantry beyond its limits and boundaries, then you are sadly mistaken. And there's a note after welcome, and it says, with this sentence, Don Quixote again uses a more distant form of address with Sancho in order to indicate his displeasure. He does not return to less formal address until he speaks to Sancho again, following Sanson's Carrasco arrival on the scene. Exactly. You'll get nothing and like it, Sancho. You get nothing. Good day, sir. Basically. That was summed up pretty well. Therefore, my dear Sancho, return to your house and tell your Teresa my intention, and if it pleases her and you to serve me without wages, bene quidem, and if not, we shall still be friends, for if the pigeon coop has plenty of feed, it will have plenty of pigeons. And there's a note after bene quidem, and it says the Latin phrase translate roughly as, then well and good, or that's fine with me. And remember, Sancho, that fine hopes are better than miserable possessions, and a good lawsuit better than a bad payment. I am speaking in this manner, Sancho, so you may understand that, like you, I, too, know how to pour down rainstorms of proverbs. And finally, I want to say to you, and I do tell you, that if you do not wish to accompany me without pay, and take the same risks I do, then God be with you, and turn you into a saint, for I shall have no lack of squires, more obedient, more solicitous, less uncouth, and less talkative than you. When Sancho heard his master's firm resolve, the sky filled with clouds and his heart sank, because he had been certain that his master would not leave without him for all the world's riches, and so he was perplexed and thoughtful when Sanson Carrasco came in, along with the niece, who was eager to hear the arguments he would use to persuade their lord and master not to seek adventures again. There's a note after niece, and it says, the housekeeper, mentioned a few sentences down, clearly comes in now too, but because of an oversight or error by Cervantes or his printer, she is not alluded to here. Sanson, famous for his sly humor, came up to him, embraced him as he had done the first time, and in a loud voice said to him, O flower of errant chivalry, O resplendent light of arms, O honor and paragon of the Spanish nation, may it please Almighty God that the person or persons who impede or hinder your third sally never emerge from the labyrinth of their desires, and never be granted what they most wish for. And turning to the housekeeper, he said, the housekeeper can certainly stop reciting St. Apollonia's prayer, for I know it is the clear decision of the heavenly spheres that Señor Don Quixote should once again put into effect his original and noble thoughts, and it would weigh heavily on my conscience if I did not convey to this knight and persuade him that the strength of his valiant arm and the virtue of his valorous spirit should tarry and be constrained no more. For delay thwarts the rights of wrongs, the defense of orphans, the honoring of damsels, the favoring of widows, the protection of married women, and other things of this nature that touch on, relate to, depend on, and are attached to the order of errant chivalry. O Señor Don Quixote, so fair and brave, let it be today rather than tomorrow that your lofty grace sets out on your way. And if anything is needed to make this a reality, here I am to supply it with my person and my fortune. And if it proves necessary to serve your magnificence as squire, I would consider it a most happy stroke of good fortune. At this, Don Quixote turned to Sancho and said, "Did I not tell you, Sancho, that I would have more than enough squires? Look who is offering to fill the position, none other than the extraordinary bachelor Samson Carrasco, perpetual diversion and delight of the courtyards of the Salamancan schools, healthy in body, agile of limb, silent, long-suffering of heat as well as cold, hunger as well as thirst, and possessed of all the qualities required to be the squire of a knight-errant. But heaven forbid that, for the sake of my own pleasure, this pillar of letters be weakened, this vessel of sciences broken, this lofty glory of the good and liberal arts cut down. Let this new Samson remain in his native land, and by honoring it may he also honor the white hairs of his aging parents. For I shall be content with any squire at all, since Sancho does not deign to come with me." "Oh, yes, I do, I deign," responded Sancho, deeply moved, his eyes filled with tears, and he continued, "Let nobody say of me, dear master, that when all the bread's eaten he leaves. No, for I don't come from ungrateful stock. Everybody knows, especially in my village, what kind of people the Panzas are, and I come from them. And besides, because of your many good actions and even more good words, I know and understand your Grace's desire to show me favor. If I tried to work out exactly how much my salary would be, it was to please my wife. When she puts her hand to convincing you of something, no mallet can press down the hoops of a barrel the way she can press you to do what she wants. But the truth is, a man must be a man, and a woman, and since I'm a man everywhere, which I cannot deny, I also want to be a man in my own house, no matter who's inside. And so, there's nothing more to do except for your Grace to prepare your will and its codicil, so it can't be resoaked, and for us to be on our way soon, so that the soul of Señor Samson doesn't suffer any more, because he says his conscience demands that he persuade your Grace to go out into the world for a third time, and I offer to serve your Grace again, faithfully and loyally, and as well and better than all the squires who ever have served knights-errant in past or present times." The bachelor was astonished to hear the manner and fashion in which Sancho Panza spoke, and although he had read the first history of the knight, he never believed the squire was as amusing as he had been depicted there. But when he heard him say will and codicil that can't be resoaked, instead of will and codicil that can't be revoked, he believed everything about him that he had read, and took him to be one of the most solemn simpletons of our day, and said to himself that two such madmen as this master and servant had never been known in the world before. Finally, Don Quixote and Sancho embraced and were friends again, and with the approval and blessing of the great Carrasco, who for the moment was his oracle, Don Quixote declared that his departure would take place in 3 days, which would give him time to prepare what was needed for the journey, and to find a full sallet hammer, which he said he must have at all costs. Samson offered him one, because he knew that a friend of his who owned one would not refuse to give it to him, though it was darkened by rust and mold rather than having the brightness of polished steel. The curses that the two women, the housekeeper and the niece, hurled at the bachelor were beyond number. They tore their hair, scratched their faces, and in the manner of professional mourners, bewailed the departure of their lord and master as if it were his death. Sanson's plan, when he urged Don Quixote to leave again, was to do what the history would recount later, and he did it all on the advice of the priest and the barber with whom he had consulted earlier. In short, in those 3 days Don Quixote and Sancho prepared everything they thought necessary, and Sancho, having placated his wife, and Don Quixote his niece and his housekeeper, at nightfall, unseen by anyone except the bachelor, who wanted to accompany them half a league from the village, they set out on the road to Toboso, Don Quixote on his good Rocinante, and Sancho on his old donkey, his saddlebags supplied with food and provisions, and his purse with money given to him by Don Quixote for any eventualities. Sanson embraced Don Quixote and asked that he keep him informed regarding his good or bad luck, so that he might rejoice over the first or grieve over the second, as the laws of friendship demanded. Don Quixote promised that he would. Sanson returned to the village, and the two men took the road to the great city of Toboso. That is the end of chapter 7. All right, so the housekeeper, no, and the niece have run to the bachelor thinking that he is the only person that would be able to convince Don Quixote to stay. Runs to him, pleads. Bachelor's like, all right, I'll talk to him. Bachelor goes there and is like, you must leave. You must go on this journey. I think that's so great. I also think it's really funny when they first start talking, the bachelor and the niece, and she's like, what did she say? He's pushing out, and Sanson is like, bones are being exposed? Like, what bones are being pushed out? And she's like, no, he's leaving. So great. All right, so our third venture out. On our way to Toboso. Let's do this. Chapter 8, which recounts what befell Don Quixote as he was going to see his lady Dulcinea of Toboso. Blessed be Almighty Allah, says Hamete Bengali at the beginning of the 8th chapter. Blessed be Allah. He repeats 3 times, and says he gives these blessings at seeing that he now has Don Quixote and Sancho in the countryside, and the readers of his amiable history can assume that from this point on the feats and exploits of Don Quixote and his squire will commence, and he will persuade them to forget the past knightly deeds of the congenious gentleman, and set their eyes upon those that are still to come, for they begin now on the road to Toboso, just as the earlier ones began in the field of Montiel, and what he asks is very little considering all that he promises, and so he continues, saying, Don Quixote and Sancho were now alone, and as soon as Sanson rode away, Rocinante began to neigh, and the donkey to snort, and both knight and squire considered this a good sign, and a fortunate omen, although, if truth be told, the donkey snorted and brayed more than the horse neighed, and from this Sancho concluded that his good fortune would exceed and go beyond that of his master, and I do not know if he based this on the astrology he may have known, since the history was nothing about that, although he had been heard to say whenever he stumbled or fell that he would have been happy if he had never left his house, because the only thing one got from stumbling or falling was a torn shoe or broken ribs, and though he was a fool in this, he was not far off the mark. Pooh, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome in. Don Quixote said to him, Sancho, my friend, night is coming on more hurriedly and more darkly than we require if we are to see Toboso at dawn, for I am determined to go there before I embark on another adventure, and there I shall receive the blessing and approval of the peerless Dulcinea, and with this approval I believe I am certain that I shall finish and bring to a happy conclusion every dangerous adventure, for nothing in this life makes knights-errant more valiant than finding themselves favoured by their ladies. I believe that too. responded Sancho, but I think it will be difficult for your grace to talk to her or be with her, at least any place where you can receive her blessing, unless she throws it down to you from the fence around the corral, where I saw her the first time, when I brought her the letter with news of the foolish and crazy things that your grace was doing in the heart of the Sierra Morena. If you remember, he did not actually make it all the way here. Did you imagine they were coral fences, Sancho? Asked Don Quixote, which you looked through or over in order to see that never sufficiently praised elegance and beauty? Surely they were galleries, or passageways, or porticos, or whatever they are called, of rich and regal palaces. Anything's possible, responded Sancho, but they looked like fences to me, unless my memory fails me. Despite everything, Sancho, let us go there, replied Don Quixote. As long as I see her, it does not matter to me if it is through fences or windows or narrow cracks, or the grille-work around a garden. Any ray of light from the sun of her beauty that reaches my eyes will illuminate my understanding and fortify my heart, so that I shall be unique and incomparable in judgment and valor. Well, the truth is, señor, responded Sancho, that when I saw the sun of my lady Dulcinea of Toboso, it wasn't bright enough to send out any rays, and it must have been that since her grace was sifting that wheat I told you about, the dust she raised made something like a cloud in front of her face and darkened it. Do you still persist, Sancho, said Don Quixote, in saying, thinking, believing, and insisting that my lady Dulcinea was sifting wheat, when that is a task and a practice far removed from everything that is done and should be done by high-born persons, who are created and intended for the practices and pastimes which reveal the rank, and even at a distance. Oh, Sancho, how badly you remember the verses of our poet, in which he depicts for us the labours performed in their crystal dwellings by the four nymphs who raised their heads from their beloved river and Tahoe, and sat in a green meadow to embroider those rich cloths which the ingenious poet describes for us there, all of them intertwined and interwoven with gold, silk thread, and pearls. There's a note after verses of our poet, and it says, Garcilaso de la Vega in his third eclogue. And the work of my lady must have been of this sort when you saw her, but the envy that an evil merchant, not an evil merchant, excuse me, but the envy that an evil enchanter feels towards my affairs alters all things that can give me pleasure, and changes their appearance. I fear that in the history of my deeds, which they say has been published, if the author by chance has some wise man who is my enemy, he will have put in certain things instead of others, mixing 1,000 lies with one truth, digressing to recount actions other than those required in the coherent narration of the truthful history. O envy, root of infinite evils and woodworm of virtues! All vices, Sancho, bring with them some kind of delight, but envy brings nothing but vexation, rancor, and rage. That's what I say too, responded Sancho, and I think that in the legend or history about us that bachelor Carrasco told us he saw, my good name must be turned upside down and dragged helter-skelter and hither and yon, as they say, through the streets. But by my faith, as an honest man, I'd never said anything bad about any enchanter, and I don't own enough for anybody to envy me. True, I have some guile in me, and a touch of cunning, but all of it is covered and concealed by the great cloak of my simplicity, which is always natural and never sly, and even if I had nothing else, there is my belief, and I've always believed, firmly and truly, in God, and in everything that is thought and believed by the Holy Roman Catholic Church, and there is my being, as I am, a mortal enemy. Oh, I'm not going to say that. A mortal enemy to some marginalized group of people. And the historians ought to take pity on me and treat me well in their writings. But let them say whatever they want. Naked I was born, I'm naked now. I haven't lost or gained a thing as long as I've put in books and passed from hand to hand out in the world. I don't care what they say about me. That reminds me, Sancho, said Don Quixote, of what happened to a famous poet of our day, who, having written a malicious satire against all the courtesans, did not include or mention a certain lady because he was not sure if she was one or not. And this lady, seeing that she was not on the list with the rest, complained to the poet, asking what she had seen in her to make him exclude her from their number, and saying that he ought to lengthen the satire and include her, and if he did not, he would wonder why he had ever been born. I know, I know. Come on, Sancho, we want Sancho. Come on, Sancho, we want you to be better. The poet did as she asked, and said the most vicious things about her, and she was satisfied, for she had become famous, though her fame was infamous. And another tale that is relevant here is one they tell about the shepherd who set fire to and burned the famous temple of Diana, counted as one of the 7 wonders of the world, so that his name would live throughout the centuries. And though it was ordered that no one should name him or mention him in speech or in writing, so that his desire would not be accomplished, yet it was learned that his name was Erostratus. And also to the point in what happened to the Emperor Charles V and a gentleman in Rome. The emperor wished to see the famous temple of the Rotunda, which in antiquity was called the Temple of All the Gods, and today is known by the holier name of All Saints, and is the most complete surviving building of all those erected by the Gentiles in Rome, and the one that best preserves the fame of its founders for grandeur and magnificence. It has the shape of half an orange, and is extremely large, and it is well lit, though the only light is from a window, or rather, a round skylight at the top, and it was there that the emperor looked down at the building, and at his side was a Roman gentleman who pointed out the beauties and subtleties of that great structure and its memorable architecture. And when they had come down, he said to the emperor, "1,000 times, most sacred majesty, I have felt the desire to embrace your majesty, and then throw myself down from that skylight, so my fame in the world will be eternal." And there is a note all the way back at Founders for Grandeur and Magnificence, and it says, "The temple, also called the Pantheon, was in fact visited by Charles, who would walk through Rome in disguise. The anecdote told here does not appear in any other text, however, and may be an invention of Cervantes." The emperor responded, "I thank you for not having put so wicked a thought into effect, and from now on I shall not give you occasion to test your loyalty. I command you never to speak to me again, or to be anywhere I am," and with those words he performed a great service to him. I mean, Sancho, that the desire to achieve fame is extraordinarily active. What you do made Horatius leap from the bridge, dressed in all his armor, into the depths of the Tiber. What burned the arm and hand of Mutius? What impelled Curtius to throw himself into the deep burning abyss that opened in the center of Rome? What, against all the unfavorable omens that had appeared, drove Caesar to cross the Rubicon? And, with more modern examples, what scuttled the ships and left the valiant Spaniards, left by the gallant Cortez, stranded and isolated in the New World? All these and many other great feats are, were, and will be the works of fame, which mortals desire as a reward and as a part of the immortality which their famous deeds deserve, though as we Christians, Catholics, and knights-errant much must care more for future glory, eternal in the ethereal and celestial spheres, than for the vanity of the fame achieved in this present and transitory world. This fame, no matter how long it may last, must finally come to an end, with the world itself, whose end has been determined. And so, O Sancho, our actions must not go beyond the limits placed there by the Christian religion, which we profess. We must slay pride by slaying giants, slay envy with generosity and a good heart, anger with serene bearing and tranquility of spirit, gluttony and sleep by eating little and watching always, lust and lasciviousness by maintaining our fealty towards those whom we have made mistresses of our thoughts, sloth by wandering everywhere in the world, seeking those occasions when we may become famous knights as well as Christians. Here, you see, Sancho, the means by which one attains the greatest praise that comes with fame and a good name. Everything your grace has told me so far, said Sancho, I have understood very well. But even so, I would like your grace to absolve a doubt that has just come to my mind. Resolve is what you mean, Sancho, said Don Quixote. Come, tell me, and I shall answer the best I can. Tell me, señor, Sancho continued, all those Julys and Augusts, and all those brave knights you mentioned, the ones who are dead, where are they now? There is a note after Julys or Augusts, and it says, in this example of Sancho's linguistic and historical confusions, the word play is based on the fact that in Spanish, Julio is the month of July, while Julio is the equivalent of Julius. Agosto is the month of August, while Agosto is the equivalent of Augustus. That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny wordplay. I like that. The Gentiles, responded Don Quixote, are undoubtedly in hell. The Christians, if they are good Christians, are either in purgatory or in heaven. That's harsh. That's harsh, Don Quixote. That's fine, said Sancho. But tell me now, the tombs where the bodies of those big important knights are buried, do they have silver lamps burning in front of them, and are the walls of their chapels hung with crutches, shrouds, wigs, and legs, and eyes of wax? And if not, how are they decorated? To which Don Quixote responded, the tombs of the Gentiles were, for the most part, sumptuous temples. The ashes of Julius Caesar were placed at the top of an extraordinarily large stone pyramid, which in Rome they now call St. Peter's Needle. The Emperor Hadrian had for his tomb a castle as large as the good-sized village, which was called Moles Hadriani. And today is the castle, sorry, the word is in between two lines, Sant'Angelo in Rome. Apologies. Queen Artemisia buried her husband, Mausolus, in a tomb that was considered one of the 7 wonders of the world, but none of these tombs, or the many others that the Gentiles had, were adorned with shrouds or any of the other offerings and signs indicating that those buried there were saints. I'm coming to that, replied Sancho. Now, tell me, which is the greater deed, raising a dead man or killing a giant? The answer is self-evident, responded Don Quixote. It is greater to raise a dead man. Ah, then I've got you, said Sancho. The fame of those who raise the dead, give sight to the blind, heal the lame, and cure the sick, and whose tombs have lamps burning in front of them, and whose chapels are filled with devout people who adore the relics on their knees, that would be a better fame, in this world and the next, than the fame left behind by all the Gentile emperors and knights-errant who ever have lived. I admit that is true, responded Don Quixote. Well, this fame, these favors, these prerogatives, or whatever they're called, responded Sancho, is what the bodies and the relics of the saints have, and with the approval and permission of our Holy Mother, the Church, they also have lamps, candles, shrouds, crutches, paintings, wigs, eyes, and legs, and with these they deepen devotion and increase their Christian fame. The bodies of saints or their relics are carried on their shoulders by kings, and they kiss the fragments of their bones and use them to decorate and adorn their private chapels and their favorite altars. What do you wish me to infer, Sancho, from all that you have said? Asked Don Quixote. I mean, said Sancho, that we should begin to be saints, and then we'll win the fame we want in a much shorter time. And remember, señor, that only yesterday or the day before, it happened so recently, it's fair to say that, they canonized or beautified two discalcid friars, and the iron chains they used to bind and torture their bodies are now thought to bring great, great good luck if you kiss and touch them, and are venerated, as I said, more than the sword of Roland in the armory of his majesty and king. God save him. And so, Signor, it's better to be humble friar in any order at all than a valiant knight-errant. 2 dozen lashings with a scourge have more effect on God than 2,000 thrusts with a lance, whether they're aimed at giants or monsters or dragons. All of that is true, responded Don Quixote. But we cannot all be friars, and good God brings his children to heaven by many paths. Chivalry is a religion, and there are sainted knights in glory. Yes, responded Sancho, but I've heard that there are more friars in heaven than knights errant. That is true, responded Don Quixote, because the number of religious is greater than the number of knights. There are so many who are errant, said Sancho. Many, responded Don Quixote, but few who deserve to be called knights. They spent that night and the following day in this and other similar conversations, and nothing worth recounting happened to them, which caused no small sorrow to Don Quixote. Finally, the next day at dusk, they could see the great city of Toboso, a sight that brought joy to Don Quixote's spirit and saddened Sancho's, because he did not know which house was Dulcinea's, for he had never seen it, just as his master had never seen it, so that both were in a state of high agitation, one with his desire to see it, the other because he had not, and Sancho could not imagine what he would do when his master sent him into Toboso. In short, Don Quixote decided to enter the city when night had fallen, and they waited for the hour of darkness in a stand of oaks growing near Toboso, and when the time came they entered the city, where things befell them that certainly were memorable. That is the end of chapter 8. All right, so they have sallied forth on their way to Toboso, and at the end of the chapter, they do get to Toboso, and Don Quixote and Sancho are going back and forth, and Sancho's like, look, I know that you want to be super well known, and you want all of these riches, and you just want everybody to know who you are, and, like, to basically worship you. What if, hear me out, what if we become friars and saints? And Don Quixote's like, all right, no. Still gonna be a knight, but thanks. Right. Chapter 9, which recounts what will soon be seen. What a chapter title, which recounts what will soon be seen. Cool, I'm glad. It was on the stroke of midnight, more or less, when Don Quixote and Sancho left the countryside and entered Toboso. There's a note after stroke of midnight, and it says, the line is from an old ballad, El Conde Claros, Count Claros. The town lay in peaceful silence, because all the residents were in their beds and sleeping like logs, as the saying goes. The night was fairly clear, although Sancho would have preferred it totally dark, so that he could find an excuse for his ignorance in the darkness. All that could be heard in the town was the sound of dogs barking, which thundered in Don Quixote's ears and troubled the heart of Sancho. From time to time a donkey brayed, pigs grunted, cats meowed, and the different sounds of their voices seemed louder in the silence of the night, which the enamored knight took as an evil omen. Despite this, however, he said to Sancho, "Sancho, my friend, lead the way to the palace of Dulcinea. Perhaps we may find her awake." "Good God, what palace am I supposed to lead to?" responded Sancho, "when the place where I saw her highness was only a very small house?" "She must have withdrawn at that time," responded Don Quixote, "to a small apartment in her castle, finding solace alone with her damsels, as is the practice and custom of noble ladies and princesses." "Señor," said Sancho, "since your grace insists, in spite of what I say, that the house of my lady Dulcinea is a castle, do you think we'll find the door open at this hour? And would it be a good idea for us to knock loud enough for them to hear us and open the door, disturbing everybody with the noise that we make? Are we by chance calling at the houses of our kept women, where we can visit and knock at the door and go in any time we want, no matter how late it is?" Sancho, are you asking to just do a B&E? Breaking and entering? Not knocking, just going in. "Before we do anything else, let us first find the castle," replied Don Quixote, "and then I shall tell you, Sancho, what it would be good for us to do. And listen, Sancho, either I cannot see very well, or that large shape and its shadow over there must be the palace of Dulcinea." "Well, your grace, lead the way," responded Sancho, "and maybe it will be, though even if I saw it with my eyes and touched it with my hands, I'd believe it the way I believe it's daytime now." Don Quixote led the way, and after some 200 paces he came to the shape that was casting the shadow, and he saw a high tower, and then he realized that the building was not a castle, but the principal church of the town, and he said, "We have come to the church, Sancho." And there is a note after "we have come to the church, Sancho," and it says, "This statement is one of the best known in the novel, for it has been interpreted as meaning that Don Quixote and Sancho have run into the church in the sense of coming into dangerous conflict with the institution. The sentence is sometimes cited using another verb to underscore that meaning, topar, the verb used by Sancho just a few lines down, rather than dar. According to Martin de Ricoeur, this is overinterpretation, and the sentence means only what it says. The building is a church, not Dulcinea's palace. Interesting. All these fun notes. All this added context is really fascinating. "I can see that," responded Sancho, "and may it please God that we don't come to our graves. It's not a good idea to walk through cemeteries at this hour of night, especially since I told your grace, if I remember correctly, that the lady's house is in a little dead-end lane." "May God damn you for a fool," said Don Quixote. "Where have you ever found castles and royal palaces built in little dead-end lanes?" "Señor," responded Sancho, "each place has its way. Maybe here in Toboso the custom is to build palaces and large buildings in lanes, and so I beg your grace to let me look along these streets and lanes that I see here. Maybe at some corner I'll run into that castle, and I hope I see it devoured by dogs for bringing us such a weary, long night." "Speak with respect, Sancho, of the things that pertain to my lady," said Don Quixote, "and let us be patient. We shall not give up." "I'll control myself," responded Sancho, "but how can I be patient if I saw your lady's house only one time, but your grace wants me to know it forever and find it in the middle of the night, when your grace can't find it, and you must have seen it thousands of times?" "You make me despair, Sancho," said Don Quixote. "Come here, you scoundrel. Have I not told you 1,000 times that in all the days of my life I have not seen the peerless Dulcinea, and I have never crossed the threshold of her palace, and I am in love only because I have heard the great fame she has for beauty and discernment?" Now I hear, responded Sancho, and I say that just as your grace has not seen her, neither have I. Hello. Sorry, I can't read your name from here, but hello, welcome in. Good to see you. Now I hear it. Oh, I already read that line. Excuse me. That cannot be, replied Don Quixote. At least you told me that you saw her sifting wheat when you brought me her answer to the letter I sent with you. Don't depend on that, senor, responded Sancho, because I want you to know that I only heard about seeing her and bringing you her answer, and I have as much idea who the Lady Dulcinea is as I have chances to punch the sky. Sancho, Sancho, responded Don Quixote, there is a time for jokes and a time when jokes are inappropriate and out of place. Simply because I say I have not seen or spoken to the lady of my soul, it does not mean that you must also say you have not spoken to her or seen her, when just the opposite is true, as you well know. They were engaged in this conversation when they saw a man with 2 mules coming toward them, and by the noise he made with the plough that was dragging along the ground, they judged him to be a peasant who had gotten up before dawn to begin his labors, which was the truth. As he walked along, the peasant sang the ballad that says, "A bad day for you, O Frenchman, that defeat at, oh my gosh, Roncesvalles." It's a name. I'm terrible with names. Apologies. By heaven, Sancho, said Don Quixote when he heard him, I doubt anything good will happen to us tonight. Do you hear what that laborer is singing? I do, responded Sancho. But what does the rout at Roncesvalles have to do with us? There's a note, and it says, Sancho quotes a different version of the ballad of Roncesvalles. He could just as easily be singing the ballad of Calainos, and it wouldn't change whether we have good or bad luck in this business. By now the laborer had reached them, and Don Quixote asked, Can you tell me, my friend, and may God send you good fortune, the location of the palaces of the peerless Princess Doña Dulcinea of Toboso? Senor, the young man responded, I am a stranger, and I've only been in town for a few days working for a rich farmer in his fields. The priest and the sacristan live in that house in front of us, and either one or both of them will be able to tell your grace about that lady, the princess, because they have the list of everybody who lives in Toboso, though it seems to me that no princesses live anywhere around here. But there are lots of ladies, and they're so distinguished that each one could be a princess in her own house. Well, friend, the lady I am asking about, said Don Quixote, must be one of them. That might be, responded the young man. And now goodbye. Dawn is breaking. And prodding his mules, he waited for no more questions. Sancho, seeing his master somewhat baffled and in a bad humor, said, Señor, it's almost day, and it wouldn't be a good idea to let the sun find us out on the street. It would be better for us to leave the city, and then your grace can wait in some nearby woods, and I'll come back in broad daylight and search every corner of this town for the house, castle, or palace of my lady, and I'll have to be pretty unlucky not to find it. And when I do, I'll talk to her grace and tell her where your grace is waiting for her to give you leave to see her, and tell you how you can without doing damage to her honor and good name. You have, Sancho, said Don Quixote, enclosed 1,000 wise statements within the circle for a few brief words. The advice you have just given pleases me, and I accept it very willingly. Come, my friend, and let us look for the palace where I shall wait while you, as you have said, will come back to find, see, and speak to my lady, from whose intelligence and courtesy I hope for more than wondrous favours. Sancho was desperate to get his master outside the town so that he could not discover the lie of the response from Dulcinea that he had brought to him in the Sierra Morena, and so he hurried their departure, which took place without delay, and 2 miles from the town they found a stand of trees, or a wood where Don Quixote waited while Sancho returned to the city to speak with Dulcinea, and on this mission things occurred that demanded a renewal of both attention and belief. That is the end of chapter 9. That's totally funny. I don't know why I didn't expect the meeting of Dulcinea of Toboso to occur, especially when Don Quixote in the first part sent Sancho to deliver a message to her and then never made it because he stopped at this inn where the barber and the priest were, and they sort of like turned him around. They were like, show us where Don Quixote is, with the plan to bring him back to the village. So he's never been to Toboso, and he's never seen Lady Dulcinea, and all of the whole story about him seeing her with the wheat and everything like that, all lies. All lies. Oh my gosh, we have a raid incoming. Hello, everyone. Welcome in. Hi, good to see you all. Hello, hello. Good to see you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, all the follows. Hello, hello. Hello, raiders. Good to see you. My name is Moog. Hi. Yeah, my name is Moog. I'm a reading streamer. Tuesdays and Thursday evenings, I read out loud, and we're currently reading out Don Quixote. So yeah, welcome in. Good to see you all. Thank you so, so much for the raid. How was your stream, Pooh? How was it? Of course, if anybody needs to take a break, feel free. Feel free. If you got a raid and run, I totally understand. But hello, thank you so, so much for being here. It's good to see you all. We are on part 2, about to start chapter 10 of Don Quixote. It's a big book, a real big book. It's a large one. So yeah, welcome in, welcome in. Oh, thank you so much. It's my natural hair color. All right. Well, let's get back. You believe it. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get back in. So we are at chapter 10. Your natural hair color is bald. It's a very strong color. I'm sure it looks great. All right. Chapter 10, which recounts Sancho's ingenuity in enchanting the Lady Dulcinea and other events as ridiculous as they are true. When the author of this great history came to recount what is recounted in this chapter, he says he would have preferred to pass over it in silence, fearful it would not be given credence, for the madness of Don Quixote here reached the limits and boundaries of the greatest madnesses that can be imagined, and even passed 2 crossbow shots beyond them. But finally, despite this fear and trepidation, he wrote down the mad acts just as Don Quixote performed them, not adding or subtracting an atom of truth from the history, and not concerning himself about the accusations that he was a liar, which might be made against him. And he was right, because truth may be stretched thin and not break, and it always floats on the surface of the lie, like oil on water. And so, continuing his history, he says that as soon as Don Quixote had entered the wood, oak grove, or forest near the great Toboso, he ordered Sancho to return to the city and not appear again in his presence without first having spoken on his behalf to his lady, asking her to be so kind as to allow herself to be seen by her captive knight, and deign to give him her blessing, so that he might hope for a happy conclusion for all his undertakings and arduous enterprises. Sancho agreed to do everything exactly as ordered, and to bring back a reply as good as the one he had brought the first time. "Go, my friend," responded Don Quixote, "and do not become disconcerted when you find yourself looking at the light emanating from the sun of beauty which you will seek. Oh, you are more fortunate than all the squires in the world. Remember everything, and do not miss a detail of how she receives you. If her color changes as you give her my message, if she becomes agitated or troubled when she hears my name, if she moves about on her pillows, if you happen to find her in the richly furnished antechamber of her rank, if she is standing, look at her to see if she shifts from one foot to another, if she repeats her answer 2 or 3 times, if she changes from gentle to severe, from harsh to loving, if she raises her hand to her hair to smooth it, although it is not disarranged. Finally, my friend, observe all her actions and movements, because if you relate them to me just as they occurred, I shall interpret what she keeps hidden in the secret places of her heart in response to the fact of my love. For you must know, Sancho, if you do not know it already, that with lovers the external actions and movements revealed when the topic of their love arises are reliable messengers bringing the news of that transpires deep in their souls. And there is a note. Let me see if I find it. There we go. Richly furnished antechamber of her rank. There's a note after that, and it says, highborn ladies would receive visitors in a special room of the house that had lounging pillows. There you go. Go, my friend, and may better fortune than mine guide you, and may you return with greater success than I dare hope for as I wait in this bitter solitude in which you leave me. I'll go and come back very quickly, said Sancho, and swell that heart of yours, which can't be any bigger now than a hazelnut, and remember what they say, a good heart beats bad luck, and where there is no bacon, there are no steaks, and they also say that a hare leaps out when you least expect it. And there's a note after, where there is no bacon, there are no steaks, and it says, Sancho misquotes the proverb, which seems to be a recurring thing for him. Just mixing up words, saying phrases totally wrong. Did Don Quixote beat up giants in the end? It totally depends on who you're asking. If you're asking Don Quixote, absolutely. 1000%. He slain all of the giants. They're all gone. If you ask literally anybody else, no. No, he was just attacking like wine sacks and skins and stuff like that. No. But for a good dream so that you can sleep, yes. Yes. He's a legend in his own mind. Exactly. Have a good sleep. I'm saying this because if we didn't find my lady's palaces or castles last night, now that it's day, I think I'll find them when I least expect to. And once I've found them, just leave everything to me. Well, Sancho, said Don Quixote, you certainly bring in proverbs that suit our affairs perfectly, and I hope God gives me as much good fortune in my desires. This having been said, Sancho turned away and urged on his donkey, and Don Quixote remained on horseback, resting in the stirrups and leaning on his lance, full of melancholy and confused imaginings, and there we will leave him and go with Sancho Panza, who rode away no less confused and thoughtful than his master. In fact, as soon as he had emerged from the wood, he turned his head, and seeing that Don Quixote was nowhere in sight, he dismounted his donkey, sat at the foot of a tree, and began to talk to himself, saying, Now, Sancho, my brother, let's find out where your grace is going. Are you going to look for some donkey that's been lost? No, of course not. Well, What are you going to look for? I'm going to look for a princess. Like that was an easy thing to do. Who is the son of beauty and the rest of heaven too. And where do you think you'll find all that, Sancho? Where? In the great city of Toboso. All right. For whose sake are you going to look for her? For the sake of the famous knight, Don Quixote of La Mancha, who rights wrongs and gives food to the thirsty and drink to the hungry. I had to double check that that's actually what that said, and yes, food to the thirsty and drink to the hungry. Cool. All that's fine. Do you know where her house is, Sancho? My master says it has to be royal palaces or noble castles. Have you, by chance, seen her? I've never seen her, and neither has my master. And do you think it would be right and proper thing to do if the people of Toboso found out that you're here intending to coax away their princesses and disturb their ladies for them to batter your ribs with sticks and break every bone in your body? The truth is, they'd be right, unless they remember that I'm following orders and that you are the messenger, my friend, and do not deserve the blame. Those two lines, you are the messenger, my friend, and do not deserve the blame, has a note, and it says, the lines are from a ballad about Bernardo del Carpio. Don't rely on that, Sancho, because Manchegans are as quick-tempered as they are honorable, and they don't put up with anything from anybody. By God, if they suspect what you're up to, then I predict bad luck for you. Get out! Let the lightning strike somebody else, not me. I'm going to go look for trouble to please somebody else. Besides, looking for Dulcinea in Toboso will be like looking for a Maria in Ravenna or a bachelor in Salamanca. The devil and nobody else has gotten me into this. Sancho held this soliloquy with himself, and the conclusion he drew was what he talked himself into now, saying, well now, everything has a remedy except death, under whose yoke we all have to pass, even if we don't want to, when our life ends. I've seen 1,000 signs in this master of mine that he's crazy enough to be tied up, and I'm not far behind. I'm as much a fool as he is because I follow and serve him. If that old saying is true, tell me who your friends are, and I'll tell you who you are. Then that other one that says, birds of a feather flock together. Then being crazy, which is what he is, with the kind of craziness that most of the time takes one thing for another, and thinks white is black and black is white, like the time he said that the windmills were giants and the friars mules dromedaries and the flocks of sheep enemy armies, and many other things of that nature. It won't be very hard to make him believe that a peasant girl, the first one I run into here, is the Lady Dulcinea. And if he doesn't believe it, I'll swear it's true. And if he swears it isn't, I'll swear again that it is. And if he insists, I'll insist more. And so I'll always have the last word, no matter what. Maybe I'll be so stubborn he won't send me out again carrying his messages, seeing the bad answers I bring back. Or maybe he'll believe, which is what I think will happen, that one of those evil enchanters he says are his enemies changed her appearance to hurt him and do him harm. Okay, I love this internal dialogue that Sancho is having, and I love that his idea is to not really find Dulcinea. One, because she doesn't exist. That's a name that Don Quixote made up for like this imaginary person who Don Quixote has never seen. Nobody's ever seen her, and she doesn't really exist. So I love that his plan is like, I'm just gonna find somebody off the street and I'm gonna say like, this is her. And if he says no, like, I'll be like, yeah, it is. What a great plan. Can't see it going wrong at all. When Sancho Panza had this idea, his spirit grew calm, and he considered his business successfully concluded, and he stayed there until the afternoon so that Don Quixote would think that he'd had time to go to Toboso and come back. And everything went so well for him that when he stood up to mount the donkey, he saw that coming toward him from the direction of Toboso were 3 peasant girls on 3 jackasses, or jennies, since the author does not specify which they were, though it is more likely that they were she-donkeys, for they are the ordinary mounts of village girls. But since not much depends on this, there is no reason to spend more time verifying it. In short, as soon as Sancho saw the peasant girls, he rode back as fast as he could to look for his master, Don Quixote, and found him heaving sighs and saying 1,000 amorous lamentations. As soon as Don Quixote saw him, he said, "What news, Sancho, my friend? Shall I mark this day with a white stone or a black?" "It would be better," responded Sancho, "for your grace to mark it in red paint, like the names of the professors, so that everybody who looks can see it clearly." And there's a note after name of professors, and it says, "It was the custom in universities to write on the walls, in red paint, the names of those who had been awarded professorships." "That means," replied Don Quixote, "that you bring good news." "So good," responded Sancho, "that all your grace has to do is spur Rocinante and ride into the open, and you'll see the lady Dulcinea of Toboso, who is coming to see your grace with 2 of her damsels." "Holy God, what are you saying, Sancho, my friend?" said Don Quixote. "Do not deceive me, or try to lighten my true sorrows with false joys." "What good would it do me to deceive your grace?" responded Sancho, "especially since you're so close to discovering that what I say is true. Use your spurs, señor, and come with me, and you'll see the princess riding toward us, our mistress, all dressed and adorned, like the person she is. She and her damsels are all shining gold, all strands of pearls, all diamonds, all rubies, all brocade cloth 10 levels high. Their hair, hanging loose down their backs, is like rays of sun dancing in the wind. Best of all, they're riding 3 piebald pilfers, the prettiest sight you'll ever see." There's a note after all brocade cloth 10 levels high, and it says, "In the weaving and embroidering of the raised design on brocade, fabric with 3 levels of handiwork was considered very valuable." Carried away by his fantasy, Sancho exaggerates. "You must mean palfreys, Sancho." "There's not much difference," responded Sancho, "between pilferies and pilfers and palfreys. But no matter their riding, they're the best looking ladies anybody could want to see, especially my lady the Princess Dulcinea, who dazzles the senses." "Let us go, Sancho, my friend," responded Don Quixote, "and to celebrate this news, as unexpected as it is good, I promise you the best spoils that I shall win in the first adventure I have, and if this does not satisfy you, I promise you the fowls that my 3 mares drop this year, for, as you know, they are in the village pasture, ready to give birth." There's a note after village pasture, and it says, "Municipalities had community grazing lands for the use of residents." "I'll take the fowls," responded Sancho, "because it's not very certain that the spoils of your first adventure will be any good." I love that Sancho knows. Sancho knows by now that the adventures that they go on are not necessarily profitable. At this point, they left the wood and saw the 3 village girls close by. Don Quixote looked carefully up and down the road to Toboso, and since he saw no one but the 3 peasants, he was bewildered and asked Sancho if he had left them outside the city. "What do you mean outside the city?" he responded. "By any chance are your grace's eyes in the back of your head? Is that why you don't see them riding towards us, shining like the sun at midday?" "Sancho, I do not see anything," said Don Quixote, "except 3 peasant girls on 3 donkeys." "Oh, God save me now from the devil," responded Sancho. "Is it possible that 3 snow-white palfreys, or whatever they're called, look like donkeys to your grace? God help us. May this beard of mine be plucked out if that's true." "What I can tell you, friend Sancho," said Don Quixote, "that it is as true that they are jackasses or jennies as it is that I am Don Quixote and you Sancho Panza. At least, that is what they seem to be." "Don't speak, señor," said Sancho. "Don't say those things, but clear the mist from your eyes and come and do reverence to the lady of your thoughts, who is almost here." And having said this, he went forward to receive the 3 village girls, and after dismounting from his donkey, he grasped the halter of one of the 3 peasant girls' mounts, fell to his knees, and said, "Queen and princess and duchess of beauty, may your high mightiness be pleased to receive into your good graces and disposition your captive knight, who is there, turned into marble, confused and struck dumb at finding himself in your magnificent presence. I am Sancho Panza, his squire, and he is the much-travelled Don Quixote of La Mancha, also called the Knight of the Sorrowful Face." By this time, Don Quixote had kneeled down next to Sancho and looked, with startled eyes and confused visions, at the person Sancho was calling queen and lady, and since he could see nothing except a peasant girl, and one not especially attractive, since she was round-faced and snub-nosed, he was so astounded and amazed that he did not dare open his mouth. The peasant girls were equally astonished at seeing those 2 men, so different from each other, kneeling and not allowing their companion to continue on her way. But the one who had stopped was annoyed and angry, and breaking the silence, she said, "Out of the way, damn it, and let us pass. We're in a hurry." To which Sancho responded, "O princess and universal lady of Toboso, how can your magnanimous heart not soften at seeing the pillar and support of knight-errantry on his knees in your subliminal presence?" Hearing which, another of the girls said, "Hey, whoa! I'll tan your hide, you miserable donkey. Look at how the gentry are making fun of us country girls now, like we didn't know how to give as good as we get. You go on your way and let us on ours, if you want to stay healthy." "Stand up, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "for I see that fortune, not satisfied with my sorrows, has captured all the roads by which some joy might come to the wretched spirit that inhabits this flesh. And thou, O highest virtue that can be desired, summit of human courtesy, sole remedy for his afflicted heart that adoreth thee, the wicked enchanter who pursueth me hath placed clouds and cataracts over my eyes, so that for them alone, but not for others, he hath changed and transformed thy peerless beauty and countenance into the figure of a poor peasant. And if he hath not also turned mine into that of a monster, abominable in thy sight, ceaseth not to regard me kindly and lovingly, and see in this submission of mine, as I kneel before thy deformed beauty, the humility with which my soul adoreth thee." You're totally right, Duddy. I don't understand why Sancho wouldn't have tried to find somebody to get in on this ruse that he's doing, to like play along with it, and instead is just surprising literally everybody in this situation. Yeah, you're totally right. He's gonna get the blanket. Keep acting like this, you're gonna get in the blanket again. "You can tell that to my grandpa," responded the village girl. "I just love listening to crack-pated things. Step aside and let us pass, and we'll thank you for it." Sancho stepped aside and let her pass, delighted to have gotten out of his difficulty so easily. As soon as the peasant girl who had played the part of Dulcinea was released, she spurred her pilfer with a goad that she had on the end of a stick, and began to gallop across the meadow. And since the goad irritated the jenny more than usual, she began to buck, and threw the lady Dulcinea to the ground. When Don Quixote saw this, he hurried to help her up, and Sancho began to adjust and tighten her pack-saddle, which had slipped under the donkey's belly. When the saddle had been put in place, and Don Quixote tried to lift his enchanted lady in his arms and put her back on the donkey, the lady got up from the ground and saved him the trouble, because she moved back, ran a short distance, and placing both hands on the donkey's rump, jumped right into the saddle, as agile as a hawk, and sitting astride as if she were a man. And then Sancho said, "By Saint Roque, our mistress is faster than a falcon, and she could teach the most skilled Cordoban or Mexican how to ride. She was over the hide bow of a saddle in one jump, and without any spurs she makes that palfrey run like a zebra. And her damsels are not that far behind. They're all running like the wind." And it was true, because when Dulcinea was mounted, they all spurred their mounts and fell in behind her and broke into a gallop, and did not look back for more than half a league. Don Quixote followed them with his eyes, and when he could no longer see them, he turned to Sancho and said, "Sancho, what do you think of how the enchanters despise me? Look at the extent of their malice and ill will, for they have chosen to deprive me of the happiness I might have had at seeing my lady in her rightful person. In truth, I was born to be a model of misfortune, the target and mark for the arrows of affliction, and you must also know, Sancho, that it was not enough for these traitors to have changed and transformed my Dulcinea, but they had to transform and change her into a figure as low-born and ugly as that peasant, and take away something that so rightfully belongs to noble ladies, which is a sweet smell, since they are always surrounded by perfumes and flowers. For I shall tell you, Sancho, that when I came to help Dulcinea onto her palfrey, as you call it, though it looked like a donkey to me, I smelled an odor of raw garlic that almost made me faint, and poisoned my soul." "Oh, you dogs!" shouted Sancho. "Oh, you miserable, evil enchanters! If only I could see you all strung by the gills like sardines on a fisherman's reed. You know so much, and can do so much, and do even more evil. It should have been enough, you villains, to turn the pearls of my lady's eyes into cork-tree galls, and her hair of purest gold into the bristles of a red ox-tail, and all her good features into bad, without doing anything to her smell, because from that we could have imagined what was hidden beneath her ugly shell, though, to tell you the truth, I never saw her ugliness, only her beauty, which was made even greater by a mole she had on the right side of her lip, like a mustache, with 6 or 7 blonde hairs like threads of gold, and longer than a span." "That mole," said Don Quixote, "according to the correspondence that exists between those on the face and those of the body, must be matched by another that Dulcinea has on the broad part of her thigh, on the same side as the one on her face. But the hairs you have mentioned are very long for a mole." "Well, I can tell your grace," responded Sancho, "that they looked like they'd been born there." "I can believe it, my friend," replied Don Quixote, "because nature put nothing on Dulcinea that was not perfect and complete, and so, if she had 100 moles like the one you describe, on her they would be not moles, but shining moons and stars. But tell me, Sancho, the saddle that seemed like a pack saddle to me, the one that you adjusted, was it a simple saddle or a side saddle?" "It was," responded Sancho, "just a high-bowed saddle, with a covering so rich it must have been worth half a kingdom." "And to think I did not see all of that, Sancho," said Don Quixote. "Now, I say it again, and I shall say it 1,000 times more, I am the most unfortunate of men." When he heard the foolish things said by his master, who had been so exquisitely deceived, it was all the scoundrel Sancho could do to hide his laughter. Finally, after much more conversation between them, they remounted their animals and followed the road to Zaragoza, there we go, where they hoped to arrive in time to take part in the solemn festival held in that celebrated city every year. But before they arrived, certain things happened to them, so numerous, great, and unusual, that they deserve to be described and read, as will soon be seen. End of chapter 10. All right, so, oh, Sancho. Oh, Sancho. So, to get away from the fact that Sancho originally lied to Don Quixote and has never actually seen Dulcinea or talked to her or anything like that. He is like, oh, you know what? Don Quixote always thinks that there's enchanters about, so I am going to pick some random people, some random ladies, and they are going to be Lady Dulcinea and her helpers. And it would have been maybe smart to like give them heads up, but now in retrospect, I see that it was probably the best the way that it played out. But the way that I was thinking was, if, Sancho had told them, like, hey, I have a friend, he thinks that you are somebody else, that you're a princess, like, can you please just, like, play it off? But doesn't do that. um, and so because of that, her and her two companions just, like, leave, and like Don Quixote doesn't follow. And I was worried that he was going to follow them to be like, wait, no, like thinking and being convinced that like these evil enchanters have enchanted and hoodwinked him once again to the point where he can't see the love of his life. I'll give you $5 to pretend to be a princess. Eh? Eh? Exactly, exactly. And here we are. All right. Chapter 11. Regarding the strange adventure that befell the valiant Don Quixote with the cart or wagon of the Assembly of Death. Okay, and it should be noted that Assembly of Death is capital and italicized. So, there you go. Your princess in another castle. Hello, Twilight. Good to see you. Don Quixote. Don Quixote was thoughtful as he went on his way, considering the awful trick the enchanters had played on him when they turned his lady Dulcinea into the ugly figure of the peasant girl, and he could not imagine what remedy he might have that would return her to her original state. These thoughts distracted him so much that, without realizing it, he dropped the reins, and Rocinante, sensing the freedom that had been given to him, stopped at every step to graze on the grass that grew so abundantly in those fields. Sancho brought his master back from his preoccupation by saying, Señor, sorrows were made not for animals, but for men. But if men feel them too much, they turn into animals. Your Grace should restrain yourself, and come back to yourself, and pick up Rocinante's reins, and liven up and rouse yourself, and show the bravery that knights-errant ought to have. What the devil is this? What kind of mood is this? Are we here or in France? There's a note after that question, are we here or in France? And it says, this is a way to say, let's behave sensibly and realistically. Interesting saying, are we here or in France, is a way to say, let's behave sensibly. I don't understand it. Let Satan carry off all the Dulcineas in the world, for the well-being of a single knight-errant is worth more than all the enchantments and transformations on earth. Be quiet, Sancho, responded Don Quixote, in a voice that was not particularly faint. Be quiet, I say, and do not speak blasphemies against that enchanted lady, for I alone am to blame for her affliction and misfortune. Her tribulations were born of the envy those villains have for me. That's what I say too, responded Sancho. If you saw her once and see her now, how could your heart not weep? That is something you can rightfully say, Sancho, replied Don Quixote, for you saw her in the fullness and completeness of her beauty. The enchantment did not go so far as to cloud your sight or hide her beauty from you. It directs the strength of its poison only against me and my eyes. But with it all, Sancho, I have realized something, which is that you described her beauty to me very badly, for if I remember correctly, you said that her eyes she had eyes like pearls, and eyes that seemed to be of pearl are more appropriate to Bream than to a lady. My belief is that Dulcinea's eyes must be like green emeralds and almond-shaped, with two celestial arcs as eyebrows. You should take those pearls from her eyes and move them down to her teeth, for you undoubtedly became confused, Sancho, and said eyes instead of teeth. Dave, hello, welcome in. Thank you so much for the follow. Everything's possible, responded Sancho, because I was as upset by her beauty as your grace was by her ugliness. But let us leave everything to God, for he knows the things that will happen in this vale of tears, this evil world of ours, where hardly anything's untouched by wickedness, lies, and deception. One thing grieves me, Señor, more than any other, which is to think that what should be done when your grace conquers a giant or another knight and orders him to appear before the beauty of the lady Dulcinea. Where would this poor giant or this poor wretch of a conquered knight find her? It seems to me I can see them wandering around Toboso like idiots, looking for my lady Dulcinea, and even if they find her in the middle of the street, they won't recognize her any more than they'd know my father. Perhaps, Sancho, responded Don Quixote. The enchantment does not go so far as to take knowledge of Dulcinea from the vanquished giants and knights who appear before her. With one or two of the first ones I vanquish and send to her, we shall determine if they see her or not by commanding them to return and recount to me what happened to them in this regard. Okay, so not only when they defeat these giants and knights are they going to send them to Toboso to find this Dulcinea, but they also want these knights and giants to also come back and report what they see. Just making sure I have that correctly. I'll tell you, Señor, replied Sancho, that I think what your grace has said is fine, and with this plan we'll find out just what we want to know, and if she's hidden away from your grace, the misfortune is more your grace's than hers. But as long as the lady Dulcinea has health and happiness, we'll resign ourselves and do the best we can, looking for our adventures and letting time do its work, for it's the best doctor for these ailments and others that are even worse. Don Quixote wanted to respond to Sancho Panza, but he was prevented from doing so by a cart that came out across the road, filled with the most diverse and peculiar personages and figures that one could imagine. The one guiding the mules and serving as the driver of the cart was a hideous demon. The cart was open to the sky, without any covering of canvas or reeds. The first figure that appeared to Don Quixote's eye was that of Death himself, with a human face. Next to him was an angel with large painted wings. To one side was an emperor wearing a crown, apparently of gold, on his head. At the feet of Death was the god called Cupid, without a blindfold, but holding his bow, quiver, and arrows. There was a knight in full armor, except that he had no helmet or sallet, but wore a hat with many plumes of diverse colors. Accompanying these persons were others with various outfits and countenances, all of which, seen without warning, agitated Don Quixote somewhat, and put fear in Sancho's heart. But then Don Quixote was glad, believing that a new and dangerous adventure was upon him. And with this thought, and a spirit prepared to face any peril, he stopped in front of the cart, and in a loud, menacing voice he said, "Cartman, wagon driver, devil, or whatever you are, tell me immediately who you are and where you are going, and who are the people you are carrying in your wagon, which looks more like Charon's boat than like an ordinary carriage." To which the devil stopped the cart gently, replied, "Señor, we are actors in Angulo el Malo's company. This morning, which is the 8th day of Corpus Christi, in a town located behind the hill, we performed the mystery play, The Assembly of Death, and we are to perform it this afternoon in the town you can see over there, And because it is so close, and to save ourselves the trouble of taking off our costumes and putting them on again, we are dressed in the same clothes we perform in. There's a note after Assembly of Death, and it says, this may be a reference to a religious play of the same title, Las Cortes de la Muerte, by Lope de Vega. There was, in fact, a theatrical impresario named Angulo el Malo. Cartman is totally in this book. I don't know how you would have forgotten. It's a pretty notable character. The young man plays Death, the other, the angel. That woman who is married to the manager plays the queen. This one is the soldier. That one, the emperor. I play the demon, and I am one of the principal figures in the play, because in this company I play the leading roles. If your grace wishes to know anything else about us, ask me, and I will respond in every particular. Since I am a devil, all things are within my grasp. He probably should not have said that. Because I am sure that Don Quixote thinks that he's actually a demon. By my faith as knight-errant, responded Don Quixote. As soon as I saw this wagon, I imagined that a great adventure was awaiting me, and now I say that it is necessary to touch appearances with one's hand to avoid being deceived. Go with God, my good people, and have your festival, and consider if this is any way in which I can be of service to you, and I shall do it gladly and willingly, because ever since I was a boy I have enjoyed the theatre, and in my youth I was a great lover of plays. Ray Nargis, thank you so much for the follow. Hello. As luck would have it, while they were having this conversation, a member of the company came up to them, and he was dressed as a fool, wearing a good number of bells, and at the end of a stick he was carrying there were 3 inflated cow bladders. This buffoon approached Don Quixote and began to fence with the stick and hit the ground with the bladders and leap high into the air, shaking his bells. This terrible sight so alarmed Rocinante that, without Don Quixote being able to stop him, he took the bit between his teeth and began to run across the field with more speed than was ever promised by the bones of his anatomy. Sancho, who considered the danger that Don Quixote would be thrown, jumped off his donkey and ran as fast as he could to help him. But when he reached him, Don Quixote was already on the ground, and next to him lay Rocinante, who had fallen along with his master. The usual finale and conclusion of Rocinante's exuberance and bold exploits. But as soon as Sancho had left his mount to assist Don Quixote, the demon dancer jumped on the donkey and began to hit him with the bladders, and fear and the noise, more than the pain of the blows, made the donkey fly across the countryside to the town where the festival was to be held. Sancho looked at his racing donkey and his fallen master, and did not know which of the 2 problems he should take care of first. But, in fact, because he was a good squire and a good servant, love for his master won out over affection for his donkey. Although each time he saw the bladders go up in the air and come down on his donkey's rump, he suffered the torments and terrors of death, and would rather have had those blows fall on his own eyes than touch a hair of his donkey's tail. In this perplexity and tribulation he reached Don Quixote, who was much more bruised and battered than he would have wished, and helping him to mount Rocinante, he said, "Señor, the devil has made off with my donkey." "What devil?" asked Don Quixote. "The one with the bladders," responded Sancho. "Then I shall get him back," replied Don Quixote, "even if he takes him down to the deepest and darkest pits of hell. Follow me, Sancho, for the cart is travelling slowly, and I shall compensate for the loss of the donkey with the mules." "There's no need to go to all of that trouble, señor," responded Sancho. "Your grace should calm your anger, for it seems to me the devil has left the donkey and gone back to his lair." And this was true, because after the devil had fallen off the donkey in imitation of Don Quixote and Rocinante, the devil went on foot to the town, and the donkey returned to his master. Way too many times, Dottie. Just way too many times. And you would think that being so concerned with having your donkey or your horse that it wouldn't happen this many times, that you would be more concerned. I don't know. You would take more measures to make sure this didn't happen. Even so, said Don Quixote, it would be a good idea to punish the discourtesy of that demon by chastising someone in the cart, even the emperor himself. Your grace should put that thought out of your mind, replied Sancho, and take my advice, which is never to interfere with actors, for they are favored people. I have seen an actor arrested for 2 deaths and then released, and no fines. Your grace should know that since they are good-natured and give pleasure to people, everyone favors them. Everyone protects and helps and admires them, especially if they're in one of the royal companies with an official license, and all of them, or most of them, look like princes in their costumes and makeup. Well, all the same, responded Don Quixote, the actor demon is not going to exit to applause, even if the entire human race should favor him. Okay, that's a pretty good line. That, the actor will not exit to applause. That's pretty good. I'll give you that. And saying this, he returned to the cart, which by the time was very close to the town. He was shouting as he approached, saying, "Stop! Wait, you happy and cheerful throng, for I want to make you understand how you are supposed to treat the knight and donkeys and animals that serve as mounts to the squire of knights-errant." You're totally right. Don Quixote is nothing if not witty. Don Quixote's shouts were so loud that the people in the cart heard and understood them, and judging by his words the intention of the man who was saying them, in an instant Death jumped out of the cart, and behind him the emperor, the demon cart driver, and the angel, and the queen and the god Cupid did not stay behind, and all of them picked up stones and stood in a line waiting to receive Don Quixote with the sharp edges of their pebbles. Don Quixote, who saw them arranged in so gallant a squadron, their arms raised and ready to throw the stones with great force, pulled on Rocinante's reins, and began to think about how he could attack them with less risk to his person. When he stopped, Sancho approached, and seeing him prepared to attack the orderly squadron, he said, "It would be crazy to attempt this adventure. Your grace should consider, señor, that for pebbles and stones there's no defensive weapon in the world except to squeeze into a bronze bell and hide there. You should also consider that there is more rashness than courage in a single man attacking an army that has death in it, and emperors fighting in person, and the help of good and bad angels. And if this doesn't move you to stay put, then remember that among all those people, even though they seem to be kings, princes, and emperors, there's not one knight-errant." "No, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "you have hit on the point that can and must move me from my determined intention. I cannot and must not draw my sword, as I have told you many times in the past, against anyone who has not been dubbed a knight. It falls to you, Sancho, if you wish to take revenge for the affront committed against your donkey. I shall assist you from here with helpful words and advice." "There's no need, señor," responded Sancho, "to take revenge against anyone, since it's not right for good Christians to take revenge for affronts. Besides, I'll convince my donkey to let me take care of the insult, and my desire is to live peaceably for all the days of life that heaven will grant me." "Well, if that is your chosen decision," replied Don Quixote. "Good Sancho, wise Sancho, Christian Sancho, sincere Sancho, let us leave these phantoms and again seek better and more appropriate adventures, for I see that this land is the kind that cannot fail to offer many that are quite miraculous." And he pulled on the reins and turned Rocinante around. Sancho caught his donkey. Death and all his flying squadron returned to their cart and continued on their way. And this was the happy conclusion to the fearful adventure of the cart of death, thanks to the salutary advice that Sancho Panza gave to his master, who the next day had another adventure, no less suspenseful than the previous one, with an enamored knight-errant. And that is the end of chapter 11. Pretty quick thinking for Sancho to be like, oh, there's no knight-errant, and you can't fight them. And then Don Quixote being like, oh, yes, you're right. I said that I would not unsheath my sword if there was not another knight, so have at him, my boy. I will give you advice from the sidelines. And Sancho's like, it's cool. I don't need it. I'll just go get my donkey. We're fine. No need to fight. And I totally would have thought, because they are literally in costume, that Don Quixote was not going to believe that they were actors, that he was really going to think that they were, angels and emperors and demons and devils and like all of that sort of thing. I really thought that's how it was going to go. Cervantes is just keeping us on our toes. Will he, won't they? We'll see. Totally mixed my pronouns in there. I guess we'll just have to find out. Okay. Let's see. Chapter 12. Regarding the strange adventure that befell the valiant Don Quixote and the courageous Knight of the Mirrors. And both knight and mirrors are capital. With all the donkey talk, I'm halfway expecting Shrek to show up in a minute. And he's making waffles, let me tell ya. Don Quixote and his squire spent the night that followed the day of their encounter with death beneath some tall shade trees, and Don Quixote, having been persuaded by Sancho, ate some of the provisions carried by the donkey. And during their supper, Sancho said to his master, "Señor, what a fool I've been! What a fool I would have been if I'd chosen the spoils of the first adventure your grace completed as my reward instead of your 3 mare's fowls. It's true, it's true. A bird in the hand is worth twice in the bush. Is worth 2 in the bush, excuse me. That was not a Sancho error, that was my error. Even so, responded Don Quixote, if you, Sancho, had allowed me to attack as I wished to, at the very least you would have had as spoils the gold crown of the Empress and the painted wings of Cupid, for I would have taken them by force and placed them in your hands. The scepters and crowns of actor-emperors, responded Sancho Panza, are never pure gold, but only tinsel or tin plate. That is true, replied Don Quixote, because it would not be proper if the finery in plays were really valuable instead of merely illusory and apparent, as the plays themselves are. I want you, Sancho, to think well, and to have a good opinion of plays, and to be equally well disposed toward those who perform them and those who write them, because they are all the instruments whereby a great service is performed for the nation, holding up a mirror to every step we take and allowing us to see a vivid image of the actions of human life. There is no comparison that indicates that we are what we are and what we should be more clearly than plays and players. If you do not agree, then tell me, have you ever seen a play that presents kings, emperors, and pontiffs, knights, ladies, and any other characters? One plays the scoundrel, another the liar, this one the merchant, that one the soldier, another the wise fool, yet another the foolish lover. But when the play is over and they have taken off their costumes, all actors are equal. Yes, I have seen that, responded Sancho. Well, the same thing happens in the drama and business of this world, where some play emperors, other pontiffs, in short, all the figures that can be presented in a play, but at the end, which is when life is over, death removes all the clothing that differentiated them, and all are equal in the grave. "That's a fine comparison," said Sancho, "though not so new that I haven't heard it many times before. Like the one about chess. As long as the game lasts, each piece has its particular rank and position, but when the game's over, they're mixed and jumbled and thrown together in a bag, just the way life is tossed into the grave." And there is a note right after that. And it says, as Martin de Ricoeur points out, the kind of comparison was common in Spain and a frequent subject for sermons. So it is not surprising that Sancho repeats it. Whenever Sancho shows signs of erudition, citing Latin words and phrases, for example, his knowledge, by dint of repetition, has its origin in the church and consequently does not affect the believability of his character. I like that. It's like, okay, so yeah, Sancho said something smart, but it's not because he's smart. It's because he's heard it many, many times. Don't get any wrong ideas. This is within his simpleton character, I promise. "Every day, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "you are becoming less simple and more intelligent." "Yes, some of your grace's intelligence has to stick to me," responded Sancho, "for lands that are barren and dry on their own can produce good fruits if you spread manure on them and till them. I mean to say that your grace's conversation has been the manure that has fallen on the barren soil of my dry wits. The time I have served you and talked to you has been the tilling, and so I hope to produce fruits that are a blessing and do not go to seed or stray from the paths of good cultivation that your grace has made in my parched understanding." Don Quixote laughed at Sancho's pretentious words, but thought that what he said about the change in him was true, because from time to time he spoke in a manner that amazed Don Quixote, although almost always, when Sancho wanted to speak in an erudite and courtly way, his words would plummet from the peaks of his simplicity into the depths of his ignorance. The area in which he displayed the most elegance and the best memory was in his use of proverbs, regardless of whether or not they had anything to do with the subject, as has been seen and noted in the course of this history. Responsabilidad, thank you so much for the follow. Hello. They spent a good part of the night in this and other exchanges like it, until Sancho felt the desire to drop the gates of his eyes, as he said when he wanted to sleep, and, after unharnessing the donkey, he allowed him to gaze freely on the abundant grass. He did not remove Rocinante's saddle, for his master had expressly ordered that for the time they were out in the countryside, or did not sleep under a roof, he should not unharness Rocinante. An ancient custom established and maintained by knights-errant was to remove the bit and hang it from the saddle-bow, but taking the saddle off the horse? Never. And so this is what Sancho did, and he gave Rocinante the same freedom he had given the donkey, for their friendship was so unusual and so firm that it had been claimed, in a tradition handed down from fathers to sons, that the author of this true history devoted particular chapters to it. But for the sake of maintaining the decency and decorum so heroic a history deserves, he did not include them, although at times he is remiss in his purpose, and writes that as soon as the two animals were together, they would begin to scratch each other, and then, when they were tired and satisfied, Rocinante would lay his neck across the donkey's. It would extend almost half a meter on the other side, and staring intently at the ground, the two of them could stand this way for 3 days, or at least for as long as they were permitted to do so, or were not compelled by hunger to look for food. I say, then, that it is said that the author wrote that he compared their friendship to that of Nisus and Euryalus, and Pallades and Orestes, and if this is true, we can infer to widespread admiration how deep the friendship of these two peaceable animals must have been, to the shame of human beings who do not know how to maintain their friendships. And there's a note after Orestes, and it says, two friendships celebrated in classical mythology, the first Roman, the second Greek. For this reason, it has been said, no man is friend to his friend, their canes are turned into lances. And this that was sung, bedbugs are passed from friend to friend. There's a note after bedbugs are passed from friend to friend, and it says the first citation is from a ballad. The second is a proverb that probably appeared in a song or ballad, as the verb sung suggests. No one should think that the author digressed by comparing the friendship of these animals to that of men, for men have learned a good deal from animals and have been taught many important things by them, for example, from storks, the enema, from dogs, vomiting, and gratitude, from cranes, vigilance, from ants, foresight, from elephants, chastity, and loyalty from the horse. And there's a note after enema. So let's see, it says, Pliny claims that the ibis could administer an enema to itself by filling its neck with water and using its long beak as a nozzle. There you go. There's a note after from dogs vomiting, and it says, a dog returning to its own vomit was cited as a symbol as a backsliding Christian who abandons a vice and then returns to it. And a note after from cranes vigilance, and it says, cranes were supposed to post sentinel at night when the rest of the flock was sleeping, and during the day when they were feeding. All of these concepts regarding animals were fairly commonplace. There you go. If you didn't know it, you do now. Finally, Sancho fell asleep at the foot of a cork tree, and Don Quixote dozed under a hardy oak. Not too much time had gone by when he was awakened by a noise at his back, and staring at his feet, he began to listen and to look in the direction of the sound, and he saw that there were two men on horseback, and that one, dropping to the ground, said to the other, "Get down, my friend, and unbridle the horses, for it seems to me that this spot has an abundance of grass for them, and the silence and solitude that I require for my amorous thoughts." Saying this and lying down on the ground were all one, and as he lay down, the armor he was wearing made a noise, a clear sign by which Don Quixote recognized that he must be a knight-errant. And going up to Sancho, who was asleep, he grasped his arm, and with no small effort brought him back to consciousness. In a quiet voice he said, "Brother Sancho, we have an adventure." "May God make it a good one," responded Sancho. "And where, señor, is your grace this lady adventure?" "Where, Sancho?" replied Don Quixote. "Turn around and look, and there you will see a knight-errant lying on the ground, and from what I can deduce he is not very happy, because I saw him get down from his horse and stretch out on the ground showing certain signs of discouragement, and when he lay down I could hear his armor clattering." "Well, what makes your grace think," said Sancho, "that this is an adventure?" "I do not mean to say," responded Don Quixote, "that this is a complete adventure, but rather the start of one. This is the way adventures begin. But listen, it seems as if he is tuning a lute, or vihuela, and considering how he is spitting and clearing his throat, he must be preparing to sing something." There's a note after vihuela, and it says, "This was an early form of the guitar." Huh, fun fact. At the end of this, we're just going to be so full of fun little facts that will just be the life of the party. Even more so than we already are. "By my faith, that's true," responded Sancho, "and so he must be a knight in love." "There is no knight-errant who is not," said Don Quixote. "Let us listen to him, and if he does sing, by following the thread we shall discover the skein of his thoughts, for the tongue speaks from the overflowing abundance of the heart." Sancho wanted to reply, but the voice of the Knight of the Wood, which was neither very bad nor very good, prevented him from doing so, and the two men listened in amazement as he sang this sonnet. "Set for me, lady, the line I must pursue, created by and matching your sweet will, and it shall be so reverenced by my own, that I'll ne'er contravene its slightest whim. If you wish my voice mute by my ills until I die, then here I've reached my end. If you desire my woes sung in a fashion rare and strange, then Love himself will chant them. A perfect proof of contraries I've become, hard as diamond, soft as wax, and yet my soul reconciles them, obeying the laws of love. I bare my breast to you, whether soft or hard, incise there and impress there all you will. Your will, I swear, shall be my eternal rule. With an O torn, apparently, from the very depth of his heart, the Knight of the Wood ended his song, and then, a short while later, in a sad and sorrowful voice, he said, "Oh, most beautiful and ungrateful woman in the world, how can you, most serene Casildea of Vandalia, allow this your captive knight to be consumed and to perish in continual wanderings and harsh and rigorous labors? Is it not enough that I have obliged all the knights of Navarra, Leon, Andalusia, Castilla, and La Mancha to confess that you are the most beautiful woman in the world?" "Oh no," said Don Quixote, "for I am from La Mancha, and I have confessed no such thing, and I could not and ought not confess anything so prejudicial to the beauty of my lady. Now you see, Sancho, that this knight is talking nonsense, but let us listen. Perhaps he will say more about himself." "He's bound to," replied Sancho, "because he seems ready to complain for a month without stopping." But that did not happen, because the Knight of the Wood, hearing voices speaking nearby, lamented no further, but rose to his feet and said in a loud but courteous voice, "Who is it? Who are you? Do you count yourself among the contented or the afflicted?" "And Tia, thank you so much for the follow." "The afflicted," responded Don Quixote. "Then approach," responded the Knight of the Wood, "and you shall realize that you are approaching sorrow and affliction personified." Don Quixote, seeing that his reply was gentle and courteous, approached him, and Sancho did the same. The lamenting knight grasped Don Quixote's arm, saying, "Sit here, Señor Knight, for me to understand that you are a knight, and one who professes knight-errantry. It is enough to find you in this place, where solitude and the night dews are your companions, the natural couches and proper lodgings of knight-errant." To which Don Quixote responded, "I am a knight, of the profession you say, and though sorrow, sadness, and misfortune have their own places in my soul, this does not mean that the compassion I feel for other people's afflictions has fled. I gathered from what you sang a little while ago that your woes are amorous. I mean, the result of the love you have for that beautiful ingrate you named in your lamentations." During this conversation they sat together on the hard ground, in peace and good fellowship, or, if at break of day they would not need to break each other's heads. "By any chance, Señor Knight," the Knight of the Wood asked Don Quixote, "are you in love?" "Unfortunately, I am," responded Don Quixote, "although the adversities born of well-placed thoughts should be considered mercies rather than misfortunes." "That is true," said the Knight of the Wood, "if too much disdain does not confound our reason and understanding and begin to resemble revenge." "I never was disdained by my lady," responded Don Quixote. "No, of course not," said Sancho, who was close to them now, "because my lady is as meek as a lamb. She's as soft as butter." "Is this your squire?" asked the Knight of the Wood. "Yes, it is," responded Don Quixote. "I have never seen a squire," replied the Knight of the Wood, who would dare speak when his master was speaking. At least, there stands mine, as big as his father, and no one can prove he has even moved his lips while I am speaking." "Well, by my faith," said Sancho, "I have spoken and can speak in front of any—" "Enough said. We'll let sleeping dogs lie." The squire of the Knight of the Wood took Sancho by the arm and said, "Let's go where we can talk in a squirely way about anything we like, and leave these master gentlemen of ours to argue and tell each other stories about their loves. I'll bet, though, they're still at it at dawn, and no closer to finishing." "All right, then," said Sancho, "and I'll tell your grace who I am, and then you can tell me whether or not I'm a match for any talkative squire." Saying this, the two squires moved away, and their conversation was as amusing as the one between their masters was solemn. All right, that is the end of chapter 12. So this is exciting. Don Quixote has run into another knight-errant who is just as down on his luck as Don Quixote is, and just woe is me about his love. I love that is being reflected back, and there's also another squire there, and I'm so curious to see the differences between both parties, to see how they are. I'm so interested. Exciting stuff coming up, apparently. All right. Chapter 13, in which the adventure of the Knight of the Wood continues, along with perceptive, unprecedented, and amiable conversation between the two squires. Just real quick, there we go. Knights and squires were separated, the latter recounting their lives, and the former their loves. But the history first relates the conversation of the servants, and then goes on to that of their masters. And so it says that as they moved a short distance away, the squire of the wood said to Sancho, "We have a difficult life, senor, those of us who are squires to knights errant. The truth is we eat our bread by the sweat of our brow, which is one of God's curses on our first parents. You could also say," added Sancho, "that we eat it in the icy cold of our bodies, because who suffers more heat and cold than the wretched squires of knight-errantry? If we ate, it would be easier because sorrows fade with a little bread, but sometimes we can go a day or two with nothing for our breakfast but the wind that blows." "All of this is made bearable and tolerable," said the squire of the wood, "by our hope of a reward, because if the knight-errant is not too unfortunate, in a little while the squire who serves him will be rewarded with an attractive governorship of an insula or a fine countship." "I," replied Sancho, "have already told my master that I'll be content with the governorship of an insula, and he's so noble and generous that he's promised it to me on many different occasions." "I," said the squire of the wood, "will be satisfied with the canonship as payment for my services, and my master has already set one aside for me, and what a nice canonship it is." "Your grace's master," said Sancho, "must be an ecclesiastical kind of knight who can do favors like that for his good squires, but mine is a lay knight. Though I do remember when some very wise people, though I think they were malicious too, advised him to become an archbishop, but he only wanted to be an emperor, and I was trembling at the thought that he'd decided to enter the church because I didn't think I was qualified to hold any benefices. Because I can tell your grace that even though I look like a man, I'm nothing but an animal when it comes to entering the church." "Well, the truth is your grace is mistaken," said the squire of the wood, "because not all insular governorships are good. Some are crooked, some are poor, and some are gloomy, and even the proudest and best of them bring a heavy burden of cares and troubles that has to be borne on the shoulders of the unlucky man who happens to be the governor. It would be much better for those of us who perform this miserable service to return home and do some easier work, like hunting or fishing. For is there any squire in the world so poor he doesn't have a horse, a couple of greyhounds, and a fishing pole to help him pass the time? I have all those things, responded Sancho. Well, the truth is I don't have a horse, but my donkey is worth twice as much as my master's nag. May God send me evil days, starting tomorrow, if I'd ever trade with him, even if he threw in 4 bushel weights of barley. Your Grace must think I'm joking about the value I put on my gray, for gray is the color of my donkey, and I wouldn't need greyhounds because there are plenty of them in my village. Besides, hunting is much nicer when you do it at somebody else's expense. The truth of the matter, Señor Squire, responded the Squire of the Wood, is that I've decided and resolved to leave the crazy goings-on of these nights and go back to my village and rear my children, for I have 3 as beautiful as oriental pearls. I have 2, said Sancho, who could be presented to the Pope himself, especially the girl who I'm bringing up to be a countess, God willing, though her mother's against it. And how old is this lady who's being brought up as a countess? Asked the Squire of the Wood. 15, give or take a couple of years, responded Sancho. But she's as tall as a lance and as fresh as a morning in April and as strong as a laborer. Those are qualities, responded the Squire of the Wood, for being not only a countess, but a nymph of the greenwood. But that damned... What? Never mind, this doesn't make any sense. But a nymph of the greenwood. There we go. To which Sancho replied rather crossly, "Oh, okay. I see what's happening. Okay, I understand now. So the Squire of the Wood insulted, insulted his Sancho's family, and then Sancho is responding and saying that it's not true. That neither his daughter nor her mother are these things. And I speak more politely. For somebody who spent time with knights-errant, who are courtesy itself, your Grace isn't very careful about your words." "Oh, Señor Squire, how little your Grace understands," replied the Squire of the Wood, "about paying a compliment. Can it be that you don't know that when a knight gives the bull in the squire a good thrust with the lance, or when anybody does anything well, commoners always say, oh, Whoreson, but that damned little Whoreson did that well. And in that phrase, what seems to be an insult is a wonderful compliment, and you should disavow, Señor, any sons or daughters who do not perform deeds that bring their parents that kind of praise." "I do disavow them," responded Sancho, "and in that sense and for that reason your Grace could dump a whole whorehouse on me and my children and my wife, because everything they do and say deserves the best compliments, and I want to see them again so much that I pray to God to deliver me from mortal sin, which would be the same as delivering me from this dangerous squirely work that I've fallen into for a second time, tempted and lured by a purse with 100 ducados, and I found one day in the heart of the Sierra Morena, and the devil places before my eyes, here, there, not here, but over there, a sack full of doblones, and at every step I take, I seem to touch it with my hand, and put my arms around it, and take it to my house, and hold mortgages, and collect rents, and live like a prince, and when I'm thinking about that, all the trials I suffer with this simpleton of a master seems easy to bear, even though I know it's more of a madman than a knight." "That," responded the Squire of the Wood, "is why they say that it's greed that tears the sack. And if we're going to talk about madmen, there's nobody in the world crazier than my master, because he's one of those who say, 'Other people's trouble, kill the donkey.'" and to help another knight find the wits he's lost, he pretends to be crazy and goes around looking for something that I think will hit him right in the face when he finds it. Is he in love, by any chance? Yes, said the Squire of the Wood, with a certain Casildea of Van Dalia, the cruelest lady in the world, and the hardest to stomach, but indigestibility isn't her greatest fault. Her other deceits are growing in his belly, and they'll make themselves heard before too many hours have gone by. There's no road so smooth, replied Sancho, that it doesn't have some obstacle or stumbling block. They cook beans everywhere, but in my house they do it by the potful. Craziness must have more companions and friends than wisdom. But if what they say is true, that misery loves company, then I can find comfort with your grace, because you serve a master who's as great a fool as mine. A fool, but brave, responded the Squire of the Wood, and more of a scoundrel than foolish or brave. Not mine, responded Sancho. I mean, there's nothing of the scoundrel in him. Mine's as innocent as a baby. He doesn't know how to harm anybody. He can only do good to everybody, and there's no malice in him. A child could convince him it's night in the middle of the day, and because he's simple, I love him with all my heart, and couldn't leave him no matter how many crazy things he does. Even so, senor, said the Squire of the Wood, if the blind man leads the blind man, they're both in danger of falling into the ditch. Brother, we'd better leave soon and go back where we came from. People who look for adventures don't always find good ones. Sancho had been spitting often, it seems, a certain kind of sticky, dry saliva, and the charitable woodish squire, seeing and noting this, said, I think we've talked so much our tongues are sticking to the roofs of our mouths, but I have an unsticker hanging from my saddle bow, and it's a pretty good one. And he stood up and came back in a little while, carrying a large wineskin and a meat pie 1/2 meter long, and this is not an exaggeration, because it held a white rabbit so large that Sancho, when he touched it, thought it was a goat, and not a kid either. And when Sancho saw this, he said, Señor, did you bring this with you? Well, what did you think? Responded the other man. Am I by any chance a run-of-the-mill squire? I carry better provisions on my horse's rump than a general does when he goes marching. Sancho ate without having to be asked twice, and in the dark he wolfed down mouthfuls the size of the knots that hobble a horse, and he said, Your grace is a faithful and true, right and proper, magnificent and great squire, as this feast shows, and if you haven't come here by the arts of enchantment, at least it seems that way to me, but I'm so poor and unlucky that all I have in my saddlebags is a little cheese, so hard you could break a giant's skull with it, and to keep it company, some 4 dozen carob beans, and the same number of hazelnuts and other kinds of nuts, thanks to the poverty of my master and the idea he has and the rule he keeps that knight-errant should not live and survive on anything but dried fruits and the plants of the field. By my faith, brother, replied the Squire of the Wood, my stomach isn't made for thistles or wild pears or forest roots. Let our masters have their knightly opinions and rules, and eat what their laws command. I have my baskets of food, and this wineskin hanging from the saddle bow. Saddle bow. I keep saying bow. I want everything to be bow instead of bow. Just in case. And I'm so devoted to it and love it so much that I can't let too much time pass without giving it 1,000 kisses and 1,000 embraces. And saying this, he placed the wineskin in Sancho's hands, who titled it back, oh my gosh, who tilted it back and put it in his mouth and looked at the stars for 1/4 of an hour. And when he had finished drinking, he leaned his head to one side, heaved a great sigh, and said, Oh, whoreson, you damned rascal, but that was good. Do you see? Said the Squire of the Wood when he heard Sancho's whoreson. You complimented the wine by calling it whoreson. And I say, responded Sancho, that I confess to knowing it's no dishonor to call anybody a whoreson when your intention is to compliment him. Not true. But tell me, senor, by the thing you love most, is this wine from Ciudad Real? Bravo! What a wine taster, responded the squire of the wood. It's from there, and no place else, and it's aged for many years. You can't fool me, said Sancho. You shouldn't think it was beyond me to know about this wine. Does it surprise you, Señor Squire, that I have so great and natural an instinct for knowing wines, that I just smell one and I know where it comes from? Its lineage, its taste, its age, and how it will change, and everything else that has anything to do with it? But it's no wonder, because in my family, on my father's side, were the two best wine tasters that La Mancha had in many years. And to prove it, I'll tell you a story about them. The two of them were asked to taste some wine from a cask, and they say what they thought about its condition and quality, and whether it was a good or bad wine. One tasted it with the tip of his tongue, the other only brought it up to his nose. The first said that the wine tasted of iron, the second said it tasted more of tanned leather. The owner said the cask was clean and the wine had not been fortified in any way that could have given it the taste of iron or leather. Even so, the two famous wine tasters insisted that what they said was true. Time passed, the wine was sold, and when the cask was clean, inside it they found a small key on a leather strap. So your grace can see that a man who comes from that kind of family can give his opinion about matters like these. That's why I say, said the squire of the wood, that we should stop looking for adventures, and if we have loaves of bread, we shouldn't go around looking for cake, and we ought to go back home. God will find us there, if he wants to. I'll serve my master until he gets to Zaragoza. After that, we'll work out something. In short, the two good squires spoke so much and drank so much that only sleep could stop their tongues and allay their thirst. For it would have been impossible to take it away altogether, and so, with both of them holding on to the almost empty wineskin, and with mouthfuls of food half chewed in their mouths, they fell asleep, which is where we shall leave them now, in order to recount that what befell the Knight of the Wood and the Knight of the Sorrowful Face. That is the end of chapter 13. Hey, Star, good to see you. There's a ballet performance going on in your hometown, Don Quixote. Amazing. Oh my gosh, I didn't know that they had ballet performances of Don Quixote. That's wild. Oh, that's so exciting. I'm glad you thought of me. Hmm. All right, this will be the last chapter of the night. Chapter 14, in which the adventure of the Knight of the Wood continues. Among the many words that passed between Don Quixote and the Knight of the Forest, the history says that the Knight of the Wood said to Don Quixote, "Finally, Señor Knight, I want you to know that my destiny, or, I should say, my own free choice, led me to fall in love with the peerless Calcadea of Vandalia. I call her without peer because she has none, in the greatness of her stature or in the loftiness of her rank and beauty. This Casildea, then, whom I am describing to you, repaid my virtuous thoughts and courteous desires by having me, as his stepmother did with Hercules, engage in many different kinds of dangers, promising me at the end of each one that at the end of the next my hopes would be realized. But my labors have been linked together for so long that I have lost count, nor do I know which will be the final one that initiates the satisfaction of my virtuous desires." On one occasion she ordered me to challenge that famous giantess of Seville called La Giralda, who is as valiant and strong as if she were made of bronze and, without moving from one spot, is the most changeable and fickle woman in the world. And there's a note after La Giralda, and it says the reference is to the weather vane at the top of the tower called La Giralda. I came, I saw, I conquered her, and I made her keep still and to the point, because for more than a week only north winds blew. Another time she ordered me to weigh the ancient stones of the corpulent bulls of Guisando, an undertaking better suited to laborers than to knights. There is a note after bulls of Guisando, and it says, ancient Iberian stone sculptures of bulls covered outside Guisando in the province of Avila. On yet another occasion she ordered me to hurl and fling myself into the abyss of Cabra, a singular and most fearful danger, and bring her a detailed report of what lies in its dark depths. There's a note after Cabra, and it says, there is a deep chasm close to Cabra in the province of Cordoba. I halted the movement of La Giralda. I weighed the bulls of Guisando. I threw myself into the chasm and brought to light what lay hidden there in darkness, and my hopes are deader than dead, and her commands and disdain are more alive than ever. In short, most recently she had ordered me to travel through all the provinces of Spain and have all the knights-errant wandering there confess that she alone is the greatest beauty of all the ladies in the world today, and that I am the most valiant and most perfectly enamored knight on earth. To satisfy this request, I have already traveled most of Spain and conquered many knights who dared contradict me. But what gratifies me the most and makes me proudest is having conquered in single combat that most famous knight, Don Quixote of La Mancha, and forced him to confess that my Casildea is more beautiful than his Dulcinea. With this one conquest, I consider that I have conquered all the knights in the world, because Don Quixote has conquered them all, and since I conquered him, his glory and fame and honor have passed and been transferred to my person. The conqueror enjoys more fame and glory, the greater the distinction of the vanquished. And there is a note after those lines, and it says, these are paraphrased lines from Alonso de Ercilia's epic poem, La Araungana. And as a consequence, the innumerable deeds of the aforementioned Don Quixote are mine and redound to my credit. Okay, this is going to be interesting because Don Quixote has not been defeated by him. This did not happen. Let's see what happens. Don Quixote was stunned at what he heard the Knight of the Wood say, and was about to tell him he was lying 1,000 times over. And he had the "you lie" on the tip of his tongue, but did his best to restrain himself in order to have the Knight of the Wood confess his lie with his own mouth. And so, very calmly, he said, with regard to your grace, Señor Knight, having vanquished almost all of the knights-errant in Spain and even the world, I say nothing, but your having conquered Don Quixote of La Mancha, about that I do have my doubts. It might have been another who resembled him, although there are few men who do. What do you mean? Replied the Knight of the Wood. By the heaven above us I fought with Don Quixote, and I conquered and defeated him. He is a man of tall stature, a dry face, long, lanky limbs, graying hair, an aquiline, somewhat hooked nose, and a large, black, drooping mustache. He does battle under the name the Knight of the Sorrowful Face, and for a squire he has a peasant named Sancho Panza. He sits on the back and holds the reins of a famous horse called Rocinante. Finally, the lady of his desire, at one time known as Aldonza Lorenzo, is a certain Dulcinea of Toboso. Like my lady, who is Casildea and comes from Andalusia and therefore is called Casildea of Vandalia. If all this is not enough to validate the truth of what I say, here is my sword, which will oblige incredulity itself to give me credence. So I'm wondering if this knight of the Wood, read part 1 and has gone out, like Don Quixote has after reading all of those chivalry books, and is just fighting all of these giants that aren't really there, and wondering if he's doing like the same thing that Don Quixote is doing, which is super interesting. "Be calm, Señor Knight," said Don Quixote, "and hear what I wish to tell you. You should know that this Don Quixote whom you have mentioned is the dearest friend I have in the world. I could even say that I value him as I do my own person, and by the description you have given me, which is detailed and accurate, I can only think that he is indeed the one you have conquered. On the other hand, I see with my eyes and touch with my hands the possibility of his being the one, and yet there are many enchanters who are his enemies, especially one who ordinarily pursues him, and one of these may have taken on his appearance and allowed himself to be vanquished in order to cheat Don Quixote of the fame that his high chivalric deeds have earned and won for him throughout the known world. And as confirmation of this, I also want you to know that these enchanters, his adversaries, only 2 days ago transformed the figure and person of his beauteous Dulcinea of Toboso into a foul, low-born peasant girl, and in the same fashion they must have transformed Don Quixote. If this is not enough to persuade you of the truth of what I say, here is Don Quixote himself, who will sustain it with arms, on foot or on horseback, or in whatever manner pleases you." And saying this, he rose to his feet and grasped his sword, waiting to see what decision would be made by the Knight of the Wood, who responded in the same tranquil voice, saying, "The man who pays his debts does not mind guarantees. The man, Señor Don Quixote, who could vanquish you transformed can certainly hope to defeat you in your own person, But since it is not right for knights to engage in feats of arms in the dark, like robbers and thieves, let us wait for day so that the sun may see our deeds, and a condition of our combat must be that the vanquished submits to the will of the victor, and does everything he desires, as long as his commands respect a knight's virtue." "I am more than happy with this condition and agreement," responded Don Quixote. And having said this, they went to the place where their squires were, and found them snoring, in the same positions they were in when sleep overcame them. The knights woke them, and ordered them to ready the horses, because as soon as the sun rose the two of them would have to engage in bloody, single, and unequalled combat. At this news Sancho was surprised and stunned, and fearful for the health of his master, because of the brave deeds the squire of the wood had attributed to his knight. But, without saying a word, the squires went to find their animals, for by this time all 3 horses and the donkey had smelled one another, and were standing close together. On the way the squire of the wood said to Sancho, "You should know, brother, that it's the custom among fighting men in Andalusia, when they are seconds in any dispute, not to stand idly by with their hands folded while the challengers do battle. I say this so that you'll know that while our masters are fighting we have to fight too, and smash each other to pieces." "That custom, Señor Squire," responded Sancho, "may be accepted and allowed by the ruffians and fighting men you've mentioned, but for the squires of knights-errant it doesn't apply at all. At least, I haven't heard my master mention that custom, and he knows all the rules of knight-errantry by heart. No matter how much I'd like it to be true that there's a specific rule that squires have to fight when their masters fight, still, I wouldn't obey it, and I'd pay whatever fine they make peaceable squires pay, and I bet it wouldn't be more than 2 pounds of wax, and I'd be happy to pay those pounds, because I know they'll cost me less than the bandages I'll need to heal my head. I already counted as split and broken in two." And there is a note after 2 pounds of wax. And it says, in religious brotherhoods, fines were paid in specific quantities of long wax candles. And there's something else. It's impossible for me to fight because I don't have a sword, and I've never worn one in my whole life. I know a good remedy for that, said the squire of the wood. I have 2 burlap sacks here, and they're both the same size. You'll take one, and I'll take one, and we'll hit each other with the sacks, and our weapons will be equal. Well then, let's do it that way, responded Sancho, because that kind of fight will dust us off more than it'll hurt us. No, it won't be like that, replied the other man, because we have to put a half-dozen nice, smooth stones, all of them the same weight, inside the sacks, so they don't blow away, and then we can hit each other and not do any harm and damage. I swear by my father, responded Sancho, just think of all the sable pelts or tufts of carded cotton you'll have to put in the sack so our skulls don't get crushed and our bones ground to dust. But even if you fill them with silk cocoons, let me tell you, senor, I won't fight. Let our masters fight, and welcome to it, and let us drink and live, for time is bound to take our lives, and we don't have to go around looking for reasons to end our lives before their time and reason and season, when they're ripe and ready to fall. Even so, replied the squire of the wood, we have to fight for at least half an hour. Oh, no, responded Sancho. I'm not discourteous and ungrateful enough to have a quarrel, even a little one, with a man after eating and drinking with him, especially if there's no anger and no insult. Who the devil could start a fight just like that? For that, said the squire of the wood, I have just the remedy. Before we begin the fight, I'll just come up to your grace and give you 3 or 4 slaps in the face that will knock you down, and that'll be enough to wake up your anger, even if it's sleeping like a baby. What? I know another move just as good to match that, responded Sancho. I'll just pick up a stick, and before your grace comes over to wake up my anger with a few whacks, I'll put yours into a sleep that'll last into the next world, where they know I'm not a man to let anybody lay hands on my face. Let each man look out for himself, though the best thing would be to let everybody's anger stay asleep. Nobody knows another man's heart, and many who come for wool go home clipped and shorn, and God bless peace and cursed fight, because if a cat that's hunted and locked up and treated badly turns into a lion, then since I'm a man, God knows that I could turn into. God knows what I'd turn into. And so from now on, I'm letting your grace know, Senor Squire, that all the harm and damage that result from our quarrel will be on your head. That's all right, replied the squire of the wood. God's day will be done, dawn, and we'll be fine. By this time 1,000 different kinds of brightly colored birds began to warble in the trees, and with their varied and joyous songs they seemed to welcome and greet the new dawn, who, through the doors and balconies of the Orient, were revealing the beauty of her face and shaking from her hair an infinite number of liquid pearls whose gentle liquor bathed the plants that seemed, in turn, to send forth buds and rain down tiny white seed pearls. The willows dripped their sweet-tasting manna. The mountains laughed, the streams murmured, the woods rejoiced, and the meadows flourished with her arrival. But as soon as the light of day made it possible to see and distinguish one thing from another, the first thing that appeared before Sancho Panza's eyes was the nose of the squire of the wood, which was so big it almost cast a shadow over the rest of his body. In fact, it is recounted that his nose was outlandishly large, hooked in the middle, covered in warts, and of a purplish color like an eggplant. It came down to the width of 2 fingers past his mouth, and its size, color, warts, and curvature made his face so hideous that when Sancho saw him, his feet and hands began to tremble, like a child having seizures, and he decided in his heart to let himself be slapped 200 times before he would allow his anger to awaken, and then fight with that monster. Don Quixote looked at his opponent, and found that his sallet was already lowered, so he could not see his face. but he noticed that his rival was a husky man, though not very tall. Over his armor he wore a kind of long jacket or coat, the cloth apparently made of finest gold, and on it were scattered many small moons of gleaming mirrors, making him look extraordinarily splendid and elegant. Waving above his helmet were a large number of green, yellow, and white plumes. His lance, leaning against a tree, was extremely large and thick, and plated with more than a span's length of iron. Don Quixote looked at everything and noted everything, and judged from what he had seen and noted that the aforementioned knight must be exceptionally strong, but for that reason he was not, like Sancho Panza, afraid. Rather, with gallant courage, he said to the Knight of the Mirrors, "If, Señor Knight, your great desire to fight does not consume your courtesy, I ask for your courtesy's sake to raise your visor a little so that I may see if the elegance of your face corresponds to that of your accoutrements." "Regardless of whether you emerge from this undertaking as a vanquished or a victor, Señor Knight," responded the Knight of the Mirrors, "you will have more than enough time and opportunity to see me, and if I do not satisfy your desire now, it is because I think I would give notable offense to the beauteous Calcadea of Vandalia if I were to delay the length of time it would take me to raise my visor without first obliging you to confess what you already know I desire." "Well, as we mount our horses," said Don Quixote, "you can certainly tell me if I am the same Don Quixote you claim to have defeated." "To that we respond," said the Knight of the Mirrors, that you resemble the knight I vanquished as much as one egg resembles another. But since you say that enchanters pursue him, I do not dare to state whether you are aforesaid or not." "That is enough," responded Don Quixote, "for me to believe you were deceived. However, in order to free you entirely from error, let us mount our steeds. In less time than it would take you to raise your visor, if God, my lady, and my arm come to my aid, I shall see your face, and you will see that I am not the vanquished Don Quixote you think I am." And with this they cut short their words and mounted their horses, and Don Quixote turned the reins of Rocinante in order to take a position in the field, so that he could gallop back and meet his adversary, and the Knight of the Mirrors did the same. But Don Quixote had not gone 20 paces when he heard the Knight of the Mirrors call, and both of them moved off course, and the Knight of the Mirrors said, "Remember, Señor Knight, that the condition of our combat is that the one vanquished, as I have said before, is subject to the will of the victor." "I know that," responded Don Quixote, "so long as the things the vanquished is commanded and ordered to perform do not go beyond the limits imposed by chivalry." "That is understood," responded the Knight of the Mirrors. At this moment Don Quixote caught a glimpse of the squire's strange nose, and he was no less astounded to see it than Sancho. In fact, he judged him to be some monster or new kind of man never before seen in the world. Sancho, who saw his master riding off so that he could charge, did not wish to remain alone with the big-nosed man, fearing that a single slap from that nose to his own would be the end of their fight, and he would be knocked to the ground by the blow, or by fright, and so he followed with his master, holding on to a strap hanging from Rocinante's saddle, and when it seemed to him that it was time to return, he said, "I beg your grace, señor, that before you turn to charge you help me climb this cork tree, where I'll be able to see better than on the ground the brave encounter your grace is going to have with that knight." "What I think, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "is that you want to climb up to the stands so you can watch the bullfight in safety." "To tell the truth," responded Sancho, "the outsize nose of that squire has me so scared and frightened that I don't dare stay anywhere near him." "It is so large," said Don Quixote, "that if I were not who I am, I would be terrified too. And so come, I shall help you climb the tree." While Don Quixote stopped to help Sancho into the cork tree, the Knight of the Mirrors took as much of the field as he thought necessary, and believing that Don Quixote had done the same, and not waiting for the sound of a trumpet or any other warning, he turned the reins of his horse, who was no faster or better looking than Rocinante, and at his full gallop, which was a medium trot, he rode to encounter his enemy, but seeing him occupied with Sancho's climb, he checked the reins and stopped in the middle of the charge, for which the horse was extremely grateful, since he could no longer move. Don Quixote, who thought his enemy was already bearing down on him, swiftly dug his spurs into Rocinante's skinny flanks, and goaded him so mercilessly that, the history tells us, this was the only time he was known to have galloped, because on all other occasions he always ran at a pronounced trot, and with this unprecedented fury Rocinante reached the place where the Knight of the Mirrors was digging his spurs all the way into his horse, without being able to move him the length of a finger from the spot where he had called a halt to his charge. At this fortunate time and juncture, Don Quixote found his adversary held back by his horse and hindered by his lance, which he failed to, or did not have a chance to, rest in its socket. Don Quixote, who cared nothing at all for these obstacles, without any risk, and with absolutely no danger, charged the Knight of the Mirrors with so much force that almost without intending to, he knocked him to the ground, back over the haunches of the horse, causing him so great a fall that without moving feet or hands, he gave every sign of being dead. As soon as Sancho saw him fall, he slid down from the cork tree and ran as fast as he could to his master, who, dismounting Rocinante, approached the Knight of the Mirrors, and, unlancing his helmet to see if he was dead, and, if he were alive, to give him some air, saw— who can say what he saw without causing amazement, wonder, and fear in his listeners? He saw, says the history, the very face, the very figure, the very appearance, the very physiognomy, the very image, the personification itself of Bachelor Sanson Carrasco. And as soon as he saw him, he shouted, "Come quickly, Sancho, and look at what you will not believe. Hurry, my friend, and see what magic can do, what wizards and enchanters can do." Sancho came running, and when he saw the face of Bachelor Carrasco, he began to cross himself 1,000 times, and to make the sign of the cross 1,000 more. During all this time the fallen knight gave no sign of being alive, and Sancho said to Don Quixote, "It's my opinion, señor, that to be on the safe side your grace should kneel down and run your sword into the mouth of this man who seems to be Bachelor Sanson Carrasco, and maybe you'll kill one of those enemy enchanters inside him." "That is not bad advice," said Don Quixote, "because the fewer your enemies, the better." And as he drew his sword to carry out the advice and counsel of Sancho, the squire of the Mirrors, now without the nose that had made him so hideous, came up to him and shouted, "Your Grace, Señor Don Quixote, think about what you are doing. That man lying at your feet is your friend, Bachelor Sanson Carrasco, and I am his squire." And Sancho, seeing him free of his earlier ugliness, said, "What happened to your nose?" To which he responded, "I have it here in my pocket." And then he put his hand into his right pocket and pulled out a nose made of pasteboard and varnish, a mask in the shape that has already been described. And Sancho looked at him more and more closely, and said in a loud, surprised voice, "Mother of God, can this be Tomé Cecial, my neighbor and compadre?" "Of course it is," responded the denosed squire. "I'm Tomé, Sancho Panza, my friend and compadre, and I'll tell you later about the secrets and lies and tricks that brought me here. In the meantime, ask and beg your master not to touch, mistreat, wound, or kill the Knight of the Mirrors who is lying at his feet, because beyond any doubt he's the bold but badly advised Bachelor Sanson Carrasco, our neighbor." At this point, the Knight of the Mirrors regained consciousness. Don Quixote, seeing this, held the naked tip of his sword over his face and said, "Knight, Thou art dead if thou dost not confess that the peerless Dulcinea of Toboso is more beauteous than thy Casildea of Vandalia. What is more, if thou wisheth to survive this contest and defeat, thou needs must promise to go to the city of Toboso and appear before her on my behalf, so that she may do with thee whatever she willeth. And if she givest thee leave to go, thou must come back and find me, and the trail of my great deeds will serve thee as a guide that will bring thee to me, and thou must tell me all that transpired with her. These conditions, as we agreed before our combat, do not go beyond the bounds of knight-errantry. I confess, said the fallen knight, that the torn and dirty shoe of Signora Dulcinea of Toboso is worth more than the unkempt but clean beard of Casildea, and I promise to go and return from her presence to yours, and to give you a complete and detailed account of whatever you ask. Thou must also confess and believe, added Don Quixote, that the knight whom thou hast vanquished was not, nor could he be, Don Quixote of La Mancha, but another who resembled him, as I confess and believe that although thou resemblest bachelor Sanson Carrasco, thou art not he, but another who resembleth him, and that mine enemies hath placed his figure before me, so that I may halt and temper the force of mine anger, and be gentle in how I use the glory of thy defeat. I confess, judge, and accept everything that you believe, judge and accept, responded the knight with the injured back. Let me get up, I beg you, if my fall will allow that, because it has left me badly battered. Don Quixote helped him to his feet, as did his squire, Tomé, and Sancho could not take his eyes off him, asking him questions whose answers were clear indications that he really was the same Tomé Cecial he said he was. But the apprehension created in Sancho by what his master had said about the enchanters transforming the figure of the Knight of the Mirrors into that of Bachelor Carrasco did not permit him to give credence to the truth he was seeing with his own eyes. In short, both master and servant were deceived, and the Knight of the Mirrors and his squire, gloomy and out of sorts, rode away from Don Quixote and Sancho, intending to find a place where they could plaster and tape the knight's ribs. Don Quixote and Sancho continued on their way to Zaragoza, where the history leaves them in order to give an accounting of who the Knight of the Mirrors and his big-nosed squire were. End of chapter 14. Alright, so that was a wild one. Alright, so we come across another knight and another squire basically imitating Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. And they agree, the knights agree, that they are going to have a battle in the morning. And whoever wins, they get power over the loser. They get to say, like, you have to do this, like that sort of thing. And also, I love the moment between Sancho and the other squire where Sancho's like, "Oh, we don't have to fight. I don't carry blades with me." And the other squire is like, "Okay, cool. I have these duffel bags. We'll fill both of them with rocks and then we'll just hit each other." And then Sancho is like, "No, I don't want to do that either." And then follows Don Quixote and he's like, "Hey, can you like shove me up into this tree so I can get a better look at what's happening instead of him being scared?" And at the end of the fight, we find out that, well, we as readers find out Don Quixote is still in his own world, but we as readers find out that the other knight was, in fact, Bachelor Sanson, who we met a couple chapters ago at their village, who told Don Quixote and Sancho, "Yes, go, sally forth, be on your way." So I'm assuming this is all part of the plan, and that the plan was to conquer Don Quixote and then make him go back home. That's what I thought it was like. I'm assuming that's what the plan was supposed to be, but it didn't go that way. Sanson falls off his horse and hurts his back and needs to leave. Under the promise that he's going to go talk to Lady Dulcinea and come back to Don Quixote and report what he's seen and all of that stuff. So silly, so silly. So yeah, that's going to be where we stop today. And it looks like the next chapter, chapter 15, is going to talk about um the well, I can just read it, like the identity of the Knight of the Mirrors and his squire. So we're going to get more insight, it seems like, with that. So that'll be interesting and fun. So, yes, that's where we are, a visual representation. Not too bad, not too bad. You can definitely tell that we've read more than what we have to go, which is exciting. But that is going to be it for today. I will be continuing very soon. And we will pick up right where we left off, which is chapter 15. So I hope you all have a great rest of your evening, rest of your day, whatever time zone you're in. Why am I still awake? Oh no, Tinker, hell no, go get some sleep. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. I hope to see you very soon, if not even sooner. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.